Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. It is to your grace's discretion who they name as wardens and lord paramounts. Both serve in your name, and you have my word, that whomever you choose will have no problems with me. My men are here to serve you both. We shall march by your side and fight for you if you'll have us. I've made my request, your grace. I ask no more than that. Davin said with a nod. Sir Jaime, could you escort Sir Davin from the tent while his grace and I discuss his proposal? Dany said. Your grace. Jaime said as Davin bowed to them both, before leaving the tent. They waited for a while before they spoke. Aegon looking to Ser Davos, and Varys, both men saying they thought Ser Davin spoke the truth, and that his word was enough. Why didn't he ask to remain warden? She asked, looking to Aegon. He asked for the minimum he could. Dany, were we to turn that down, it would show us to be tyrants. But had he asked for more, then we would have been able to give him a choice for which he would accept, marriage or wardenship. Aegon said, You think him true? She asked. I think we still have a warden of the West. Ser Davin is a man we can work with. We have another kingdom sworn to us, the North, the Reach, the Riverlands, the Iron Island, Srode, and now the West. We have the realm, my love. Aegon said. Once we take King's Landing, Dany said. Once we take King's Landing. She called for Ser Jaime to bring Ser Davin back in. Both she and Aegon rising when the man entered the tent. Ser Davin, His Grace and I accept your offer of fealty, and we ask that you continue to serve as our Warden of the West. Yang said, her voice regal and firm. Your Grace, Davin said with a bow, as he looked to Ser Jaime, who nodded his approval and allowed him to take out his sword. After kneeling and swearing his fealty, Dany listened as Ser Davin was told the Reach Lords had sworn to them also, and then with Quijano and some of their men, they sent him to bring his forces to join with their own. They spoke to their advisors for a bit, and she smiled when Lexi's head came up from under the covers of the bed. Dany walking over to pick up the red dragon and hold it in her arms as Aegon dismissed everyone and sent them to their own tents for the night. We're almost done, my love, Aegon said as he stroked Leia Crox's head. Almost, she said. King's Landing 305 AC. Cersei. She sat in the meeting and listened as Qyburn told her that Davin had left the West. Cersei smiling at the knowledge that, along with the Golden Company and Euron's fleet, they'd have more than enough men to face the Dragon Whore and the Bastard, especially after they had faced Euron's surprise, which just thinking about made her almost giddy. Cersei finding herself wishing to be on the silence with her love, to look down on the faces of her enemies as they were brought low. It was the only reason that she didn't want Euron to end them all himself. She wished to look on their faces one last time, first. As Qyburn mentioned something about the Reach and Dorne, Cersei found herself lost in the fantasy of what she would do to the Dragon Whore when she got her hands on her. How she'd tie her up while she and Euron ravaged each other on the bed, only stopping to inflict pain and suffering on the woman who dared to think she could take her throne. She began to think of the Bastard and found her thoughts going in a different direction, the moisture growing between her legs as despite herself, she imagined what it would be like to ride a dragon. He should have been her son, hers and Rhaegar's, and as she closed her eyes, she found herself picturing Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen. She licked her lips without realizing as she imagined him tied in her room and in her bed for her to do with as she pleased. It was the sound of a loud banging on the door that shook the fantasy from her mind. Cersei had been smiling as she just imagined removing his breeches, and was now looking furiously at the guard who had entered and disturbed her thoughts. Your Grace, the guard said, and she glared at him. The man moving to Qyburn instead as she picked up her glass of wine and drank it slowly, watching as the guard then hurried from the room and Qyburn looked to her. Your Grace, there is something you must see. Qyburn said, his voice as even as ever, though she felt his expression was off somewhat. What is it? As Euron returned, she asked, the heat between her thighs, something that was now growing from a distraction into a need. Your Grace, the fleet, Qyburn said, and before he'd finished, Cersei was on her feet. Glass in hand, she walked to the balcony and looked out to the bay. She saw the ships as they returned victorious. Hundreds of them, and her eyes were drawn to the one that led. the silence looking as imposing as the man who captained it. Cersei swore she could see the silver hair of the dragon whore as she knelt by Euron's feet, the dark hair of Jon Snow as he was tied to the mast, and she laughed and spun as if she was a little girl once more. Her giddy laugh sounding more like a cackle than the girlish giggle she imagined it to be. Cogburn stood, looking at her with a confused look on his face, his eyes drawn to the bay where the 3 or 4 ships that had survived their encounter now limped back. She didn't see how he looked at her, so happy was she in her victory, and his words were mere noise as she turned to ready herself for her love's return. "We must gather everyone. They need to see what happens when you challenge Linus's rule. We must reward him somehow. A tourney, my love deserves a tourney. I'll throw him the biggest in the land. We can even give a night with the dragon whore as a prize." Cersei said, laughing as she walked back into the room. "Your Grace," Clorburn said, "I want Snow kept alive, Catelyn. Let Euron believe he's dead, but I wish him kept alive. I have plans for him," Cersei said, refilling her glass. "Your Grace, the Golden Company have Strickland brought to me. It's time I gave him his payment, his true payment," Cersei said, thinking of what she'd do to the sniveling toad. "Your Grace, what did you see?" Clorburn said, his question catching her by surprise and making her lose her thoughts for a moment. "I saw, my love, our fleet. Our victory is complete," she said before she swallowed more of the wine. "You're lost, Your Grace," Clorburn said, and she laughed, and then looked to see her hand wasn't doing likewise. It took her a moment to see that he was being serious, that this was no jape, and once she realized it, she ran to the balcony, her eyes looking to the bay where 4 damaged ships with burned sails and broken masts were barely moving towards the docks. She looked past them, wiping her eyes with her hands as she desperately searched for the silence, her head shaking from left to right as she did so. It can't be," she said, turning to storm past Reborn. It took some time for the men to be brought to the throne room. 4 captains and their first mates, all that remained of the once mighty Iron Fleet. Cersei sat on the throne, with Sir Robert Strong standing to her side, her eyes on the Ironborn as the first of them stepped forward and began to tell his tale. Each of them told of the same thing, an ambush, dragons, fire, and the death of her love. Cersei listening dispassionately as one told how Jon Snow had jumped from a dragon's back to face Euron himself, before another told of how he himself had seen Euron lose his head. "Sir Robert," she said as her other guards took up their position beside her. The first man's head was crushed between the giant's hands. The second man was brought to the ground with a butt from his head. By the time he took out his sword, 3 of the 6 men already lay dead, and yet it was their blood that Cersei wished to see. These men had lived while her love had not. They would live no longer. And as she watched, she found her thirst for blood was still unquenched. Not that Sir Robert didn't paint the walls with the blood of cowardly krakens. One man losing his head and another his legs, while the last was cut in 2 by the great sword that Sir Robert wielded, as if it was merely a dagger. She heard the screams and then silence, Cersei turning to Qyburn and giving him the nod before she walked back to her room. Once there, she poured the wine into her glass and stepped out onto the balcony to look out on the docks once more. The 4 ships were now aflame, and she knew that her hand had assured that every single kraken paid the price this night. Allowing these men to live when her love did not was not something she would countenance, and as she drank and watched the ships burn, she felt her tears begin to fall. She threw her glass against the wall and picked up another, filling it before emptying it and then moving to her bed. There her tears turned into cries, and she found herself laying on the bed and beating her hands against it, crying out his name as she did so. Euron, please come back to me, my love. I need you, don't leave me alone. Euron." Her dreams that night were of revenge and of something else. Cersei's waking to find her fingers moving between her legs as she welcomed the images she now saw in her head. A dragon whore tied to the pillar in her room, gagged and unmoving, while Cersei rode the man she loved on her bed, his dark hair and gray eyes looking up at her while he swore his love for her and her alone. "I am yours and you are mine. My dragon," she said as she felt her pleasure reach its peak. The Vale 35 AC. He was not welcome here. They'd made that clear to him from the moment he'd arrived, and not even saving Sansa's life once more had changed that feeling. Lord Robert, Sweet Robin, whatever his name was, seemed to be the only one who appreciated what he did, and Theon found himself invited to join the young lord more than once. Not that he enjoyed the boy's company, or the way he looked at Sansa, though it was how he spoke of her that truly raised his ire. Hearing how she'd pleasured the boy the night before, Theon had at first assumed the boy to be jesting or to at least be thinking wishfully. Seeing the small changes in Sansa when she was with the boy and how she'd almost shudder when he touched her, Theon was certain now that he was not. He waited for the right chance to speak to her alone, something he rarely got anymore as the Lord was jealous of any who spent time with his betrothed. It took him more than a week after he'd noticed a change in Sansa's demeanor to finally get a chance to speak to her alone. Theon had hidden in the sept and waited until her guards had checked it and took their place at the door. Once they had, he came out of his hiding place and made his way to her, standing a little away from her while she knelt and lit a candle. He waited until she rose so as not to startle her, and when she turned and saw him, she gave him both a smile and then a confused look. "Theo?" she asked, her eyes looking behind him to the closed door. "I must speak with you, Lady Sansa," he said softly, and she nodded as they took a seat. "What is it, Theon?" she asked. "Horses, supplies. I can get them and take you from this place, away from him," he said, looking to the ground when he did so. "Him?" she asked, confused. "Lord Robert, I know what he makes you do," he said, his voice cracking as he dared not say the words. "How? How could you?" she asked, her face flushed as she shook her head. "He speaks of it often. I know, Sansa, I know it's not what you wish. Ask it of me and I'll take you anywhere you need to go," he said, reaching out and touching her hand. "I cannot. There is nowhere for me to go," Sansa said, wiping a tear as she stood up. Jon will take you back, Sansa. He's your brother. He'll accept you and what of me kneel and beg him to give me what is mine? Have me crawl before his dragon bitch so that she can sit high above me and teach me my place," Sansa said, her face sneering and her voice angry. "It's better than this, Sansa. What he's making you do," he said, his voice stopping of its own accord. He heard the snort and small laugh, but ignored it, his eyes on her as she walked from the seat and stood in front of the statue of the stranger. Theon looked at her as she lit another candle and said a prayer. The look on her face when she turned was one he remembered from his sister when she had sworn to see their uncle dead. "I cannot go back. I can never go back. I am to be Lady of the Vale. I must be Lady of the Vale," Sansa said determinedly. "Sansa," he said softly as she walked to him. The kiss she gave him on the forehead, the only reply he was given by her. Later that night, he sat in the great hall and watched as she sat at the high table with Sweet Robien. He noticed it when her mood changed and found his eyes drawn to the eager look that was on the boy's face as the meal came to an end and they readied for bed. Turning to the others in the room, he saw some sitting with smirks on their faces, some of the men who the Lord had told of his nightly activities. Theon found himself gripping the knife tightly in his hand and almost cutting into the plate as he cut his meat. After Sansa and Sweet Robin left, he found the eyes of the room now on him, and so soon enough he finished his meal and his drinks and moved to walk to the room he'd been given. As he was leaving the hall, he noticed that some of those who were usually among the last to leave had left earlier, just as he now was. Theon finding it strange that Sir Mitchell, Sir Harold, and the group that usually gathered with them weren't still enjoying their night. As he walked to his room, he saw the open door that led to the outside and moved to close it. He heard muffled noises coming from outside and found himself heading in their direction, keen to see what was making them, something that became all too apparent as he found himself almost walking into Sir Harold and the Lady Miranda. That they were too wrapped up in what they were doing to notice him was his only saving grace. He ended hiding against the wall as he looked to their coupling, their whispered words of passion soon rising higher. "When I'm lord, you shall be my lady," Harold said as he pressed into the woman that was pressed up against the wall. "I'm no lady," Miranda said, as Theon watched her wrap her leg around Harold's back. "Ladies are fucking dull, Randa. Sansa Stark is a lady," Harold said as he began to thrust into her. "Sansa Stark is a child," Miranda said, her laugh cut short by a gasp as Harold began to move faster. "A stupid, dumb child, just like her cousin," Harold said. "When?" Miranda asked. "Soon," Harold said, and then the conversation stopped. Words lost to grunts and groans, and Theon snuck back to his room before he could be discovered. Over the next few days, he did his best to find out more, learning that the affair between Sir Harold and Lady Miranda was a passionate one. Theon noticing the number of times the two snuck off to couple and thinking the lady must have a never-ending supply of moon tea given the amount of the night's seed she took. He noticed how the lords and ladies of the Vale looked to Sansa and Sweet Robin, a look on their faces that he knew all too well. It was one he'd suffered many times since he'd betrayed Robb, a look that most Northerners and most of the Vale Lords wore when they looked his way, a look that showed their contempt. He tried to get to Sansa once again, only to find that whether it was by her own design or someone else's, not only was he never given the chance to sneak up on her, but when he asked to speak to her, it was denied. Or more precisely, him speaking to her alone was denied. Dan instead forced to come up with some made-up reason why he needed to talk to her, and then having to do so with witnesses around. It was wearing him down, a feeling of oppression that he had not felt since he had been reeked that soon threatened to overwhelm him. As different as this was from that, the knowledge that he was being watched, judged, and that one wrong move could cost him his life was still the same. It all came to a head one night, Theon almost making a fool out of himself in his effort to speak to her, and once again being denied. He got drunk and was carried to his bed. The worry and concern he had in his heart finally put at rest due to the amount of ale that he had swallowed. It was not to last for long, and when he woke the next morning with an aching head, it was to find himself in a nightmare that he'd seen coming. "You're to come with us," the guard said, and he was dragged to the great hall, his feet brushing along the ground as he was held by his arms, his head thumping and his eyes closed to keep out the daylight. "What's going on?" he asked, but the guard said nothing. He was thrown on the floor roughly, and he then heard a pained shout as he rose to his feet. Theon looking to see Lady Aenya and Lord Nest. Roose were sitting in front of him in two chairs, while around him the room was full of knights, lords, and ladies. Hearing the sound of the cries from the other side of him, he turned to see Sansa standing there with tears falling from her eyes, and he looked at her confusingly, his head hurting even more when he got a slap to it, when he tried to move to her. "Sansa, what's going on?" he asked, and she shook her head. Theon turning as Lady Aenya began to speak. "We're here, Greyjoy, because Lady Sansa killed our lord," Lady Aenya said, and Theon heard Sansa's pained cry and found all those in the room looking at them both, their hate clear in their features. He looked to the Lady Aenya and motioned to Sansa and then made a move to comfort her, the woman nodding her permission, and he was allowed to walk to Sansa's side. Taking her in his arms, he whispered in her ear and felt her shake her head. Theon speaking softly once more and finally feeling her nod. "I demand a trial by combat," Sansa said when he moved from her, her voice shaky but the words clear. "Do you have a champion?" Lady Aenya asked. "I'll stand for Lady Sansa," Theon said loudly, looking around the room. Dorn 3005 AC. Maester Miles. Calayut, and he looked to the walls of the city and the army that was encamped outside it. The news of their landing, something that he had not believed, and nor had the older Maester, though, compared to the man who led it, that news was the least of their surprises. Quentyn being alive was something no one in Dorne had still believed. Not even the prince's sister had hoped for such a thing. Now they had found out that he'd not only lived, but he'd somehow gained an army that now besieged Sunspear and was perhaps going to cost them another prince or a princess. He turned to the older man and waited for him to speak. Caelot was far more experienced than he, and while he'd moved to the rookery, it was the older man who had told him that he was wasting his time. Something that he'd seen the truth of not long after as he watched the ravens being shot from the sky. It was only the fact the army hadn't attacked that had kept the keep as calm as it was. Life inside the walls of Sunspear and the old palace still carrying on normally despite the army that now surrounded them. "When will he parley?" he asked, the older man who stared out on the army. "He is ever the fool, Miles. Ever a man who believes himself more than he is. Quentyn won't send for a parley. He'll wait for us to come to him. He thinks it shows him powerful," Caelot said. "Is he not?" Miles asked, looking at the army that surrounded them. "Dorne does not surrender, Miles. It will not be subjugated. If the dragons couldn't do so, then what chance a withered snake like Quentyn Martell?" Caelot said, his voice dripping with disgust. "He is our prince," he said, and the man snorted. "Many times I counseled his father about his foolish son. Trystane was a boy, and green, and yet he would have made a far better Prince of Dorne than his fool of a brother. As for Arianne, on her worst day she outmatches Quentyn." "What if he's changed?" Miles asked, worriedly. "A man cannot change his nature. Not even love can see that done." Caelot said, "Come, we must speak privately." He followed the master from the walls of the city, and back to the old palace, finding a group of men waiting for him when he got there. Some of them were guards, and there was one or two of the few knights still left in the city. Miles looking from the men to the old master and back again. Caelot bid him join him inside, and once there he saw Sarah Manfrey, Martell and Ricasso were both dressed and ready to ride out to speak to the army and the prince outside their walls. "You're sending out a party?" he asked. "I am." "We have no choice. Sunspear will fall as will the old palace, and the true battle will not be fought today," Katzliot said as they walked to what were or had been his room. Once they reached them, the Maester sat down and began to write out some words on a piece of parchment, writing some more on another before letting them dry and then looking to him. "You must ride miles to the Tor and Lady Muria. Give her this note, and then take ship and sail to Stonehelm. Irian and the Dornish army are marching to meet up with the Targaryens. Ride and ride hard and let them know of this." Caelot said. "I will," Miles said. "Be careful, my friend, for I would expect there to be men sent after you." "What of you?" he asked, to a small laugh. "I'm about to kiss a prince's arse, and I'll be his most leal servant until our princess returns. And then I'll watch him face a traitor's death," Kat said. He was snuck through the keep, 4 guards with him, and soon he was in the tunnels and making his way to the horses that awaited them. They wasted no time once they reached them, mounting up and riding fast, and Miles was relieved to see they had no pursuers. The day turned into night, and the cold air of the desert kept him awake as the men kept riding. Their destination was miles ahead, and their mission was one that none of them wished to fail. The Crownlands 305 AC. Irian. It had been more than 2 decades since Dorne had assembled an army such as the one she now led through the Stormlands. Irian, feeling that her father and uncle would both be proud of her for being able to be the one to do so. Albella, Aelia, Dorier, and Loreza rode with her, while Cirella rode in the cart, her cousin working on things that even Irian was unaware of, and forgoing a horse so she could continue to do so. They had passed through the Stormlands with no difficulty other than a tense meeting with the newest Baratheon to now name himself a lord. Edric Storm claiming a name that he had no right to and not taking her up on her offer to go and visit a king and queen that would decide if he would remain a Baratheon and stay a lord. Ariane found herself more than happy that he had not, as she detested the man almost from the moment they'd met. Another stag who thought himself to be above others, she had thought, and when she had found that he had some issue with the king and queen, she'd pressed down hard on that wound as much as she could. She laughed at the memory of the man's face and resolved to speak to Jon Snow about this boy. Though the news that Edric had shared about Jon Snow had left her with her own issues to resolve. "He is a bastard no more, just as I am not," Edric said. "Her grace legitimized him," she asked. "You've not heard, really, princess." "I had thought you better informed," Edric said with a sneer. "Heard what, Lord Storm?" she said, trying not to smile, when the man bristled at her use of his bastard name. "Jon Snow is not the son of Eddard Stark. He is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, named Aegon after his brother, I assume," Edric said. "You lie. You dare to impugn my aunt's reputation so," Elia said. "What care I for the reputation of a Dornish woman?" Edric said, and Irain knew she was at least partly at fault for him saying such a thing. "Careful, Lord Strom, Dorne marches to another fight. But speak once more in such a way on my aunt, and it'll be the Stormlords that face our fury and not the lions and krakens," she said, pleased to see worried looks on some of the faces around him. "Forgive me, princess. I spoke out of turn." Edric said his words far more contrite than his tone. "Where did you hear this tale, my lord?" she asked. "This truth?" He had then shown her the Raven's scroll, the words of the spire laid out for all to see, and later as she'd spoken to Daemon and to her cousins, it had been Cirella who'd made it all make sense. "That's why the Kingsguard were there," Cirella said. "What?" she asked. "Ser Gerold, Ser Oswell, and Ser Arthur Dane, they guarded the Tower of Joy. Father always thought it odd that the Sword of the Morning was there and not by Rhaegar's side. He was there because he was guarding a prince, a king." Cirella said, "While leaving our aunt and cousins unguarded," she said bitterly. "They were not. Father may have said so in his worst moments, but think on it, Ari. They were in King's Landing. They had an army, while in Dorne there were but 3 men. Men who should have been elsewhere," she said angrily. It was an anger that now days later had yet to dissipate fully, and yet she had continued her march. The pain of the past lessened compared to the pain of the present. And while she may still blame Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, or whatever he was to be known as for that, there were others who she blamed for so much more. An uncle, 3 cousins, and a woman she'd thought of as an aunt even despite what she had done. Rosier may have protected one wife over another, one son over a son and daughter, but it had not been he who'd given the order for their deaths, nor he who had been the cause of the deaths of more of her kin. So while she was having trouble coming to terms with the fact that Jon Snow was Rhaegar's son and the feelings that stoked within her, compared to her feelings about the lions, they mattered not. Their scouts came back to them as they marched through the King's Wood. The armies of the Targaryens were now but a few miles away, and as she slept beside Daemon that night, she felt a sense of peace she'd not felt in quite some time. Soon she'd see her family avenged, and once it was done, she could decide how she felt about this. Aegon Targaryen, they would kneel to him, but they would never bow. They'd not to a dragon of old, and would not to one now. "Are you sure about this?" Daemon asked her when she readied her horse the next morning. "I am. We ride out to greet them. Cyrilla and the Sand Snakes can lead the army forward. You, I, and Ned Dane can ride out and greet the dragons," she said, looking to him. "And this Aegon?" he asked. "I'll hold my tongue," she said with a smile, before she kissed him. They rode fast, and she looked to the city in the distance. King's Landing and the Queen that sat the throne would soon be in their control, and justice would soon be served. She smiled at the thought and carried that smile with her for most of the ride, though it was wiped from her face when she saw the army they came upon. Arianne gulping a little at the sheer size of the mass of men that stretched out in front of them. Their scouts said it was the largest army they'd ever seen, but even that didn't prepare her for the sight, nor did her first glimpse of the dragons as they flew over her head. Orianne looking to the sky to see the two riders on their backs, and yet it was the dragons themselves that impressed her. One was black tinged with red, and the other a beautiful green. They rode slowly from then, wary and careful, and more than once looking to the sky. The group of men who came to escort them into the camp itself was made up of Westeros knights, and what she assumed were Dothraki. Lord Dion, an old gray-haired man who was wearing the hand of the king's pin on his chest, said as Ned nodded and smiled at the man. "Ser Davos, it's good to see you again. May I present the Princess Arianne Nymeros Martell," Ned said to the man. "Princess in honor, allow me to escort you, and your men to their graces." Davos said, and Arianne noticed the look he gave Ned. It was one she couldn't understand, sympathetic and sad, and she wondered why that was. Riding through the camp, the true scale of the army was even more clear. Arianne seeing sigils from the west, the north, the reach, and though the horse lords and the Unsullied didn't wear sigils, their own tents were clear for all to see. They were brought to a large tent, and Daemon helped her dismount. Arianne seeing Ned speak to Ser Davos some more, a worried look appearing on Ned's face that he was given no chance to explain. "Princess Arianne, you've arrived at a most opportune time, but I'm afraid I'm also the bearer of bad news," a dark-haired, gray-eyed man said as he walked with a silver-haired woman toward the tent. "Your Grace," she said, realizing who the man was, though from the woman beside him and not so much from himself. "Lady Kinvara, Ser Davos?" the king asked the gray-haired man. "Is inside. Your Grace." "Princess, there is much we need to speak on, including your brother," the king said. "My brother?" she asked, confused. "Prince Quentyn seeks to replace you, Princess Arianne. Dorne has fallen," the queen said as she looked to her and made ready to laugh. "Now, let's speak about how we are to help it rise again, shall we?" the king said, and she nodded as she walked into the tent. "The Crown lands, 305 AC, Kinvara." She sat at the table to one side of the king and queen, the princess sitting on the other side of the table, and the tall woman who unnerved her a little sat off to one side watching them all. Kinvara waited for the king or the queen to look to her and give her leave to tell her tale. But for now there was silence. It felt as if the three royals were taking the measure of each other, the princess staring at the king while the queen looked at the princess and at her husband's reaction to her. That had been a welcome surprise to her. Kinvara and her men happy to arrive to find not only was the queen and her army marching to take Westeros, but she and the man she loved were joined by bonds deeper than those of their wedding vows. The world was righted, and the nightmarish dreams she had of a future without Daenerys Targaryen were thankfully now just that, dreams. As the silence dragged on, she wondered who it was to be that broke it. Her coin would have been on the princess, but she found to her surprise, it was the king. "We could speak of how Dorne feels about me, Princess Arianne, though truthfully I care not," the king said to a look of confusion from the princess. "If what you say is true about my brother, your grace, then you're perhaps right. Though I'm surprised you have so little care for our feelings," Arianne said. "Dorne will kneel to my wife, princess, and they will kneel to me." You will swear your fealty to us both, and that will be the end of it. Hate me, despise me, chafe because you have to kneel if you wish. I have no time for it. My wife has no time for it, and in the end, you have no choice, the king said. Dorne has been taken from you, Princess Arianne. You could march your men back to take it. You could even manage to do so after a bloody battle or two. And then when we call you to kneel, you could refuse. But even as strong as you are now, we could force you to your knees, should we wish. If we waited until then, it wouldn't require more than a tap to your shoulder to make you do so. However, that is not our wish, the queen said. It's not, Arianne asked curiously. We intend to help you take back Dorne from your usurping brother, and to destroy this army he brought into your country, and him with it. Do you have a problem with that, Princess Arianne? The queen asked. Why, your grace, Arianne asked. Despite how you may feel about my husband, he does not feel that way about Dorne. You believe my brother's actions shamed Dorne, shamed his wife, and perhaps hold a grudge against his son because of it. My husband, however, is not his father, just as I am not my own. Children are innocent of the crimes of their father, princess, innocent of their mistakes, their actions, and their failures. The queen said, You accept Rhaegar's actions as wrong? Arianne asked, surprised. No, I accept that you and Dorne may feel that way about them, that and nothing else, so scorn me, whisper behind my back. Name me how you wish. I spent a lifetime with such things, and I care not about them. I care for one person's opinion about me, that is all, and you, Princess Arianne, are not that person, the king said, his voice firm, and Kinvara was in no doubt who it was. The king spoke up. She looked to the princess to see a small smile on her face, a nod of her head, and then the king looked to her and nodded. Belicho Statagon, Triarch of Volantis and would-be ruler of all Essos, is responsible for the army that has taken Dorne, princess. Your brother Quentyn has made a deal with him, to take your throne and then to kill the king and queen, to kill their dragons, and with them gone he intends to conquer Essos and bring it under Volantis' control. Kinvara said. Is he a madman? Arianne said as she scoffed. Far from it, he's a dangerous man, a man to be feared, and one ruthless enough to see it done. Kinvara said. He made but 2 mistakes, the queen said. Which were? Arianne asked. He placed his faith in your brother's man to end my life and bring my husband to his knees, and he has woken the dragons. The queen said to a smile from her husband, Sir Gerald Dane is dead, Princess Arianne, killed on my orders and by my hand, though not precisely. The king said, and Kinvara swore she heard a chuckle from the queen. You killed him. Why? Arianne asked, and Kinvara couldn't make out her expression. He was working with your brother and tried to kidnap and then kill my wife. He died painfully and was at least more useful in death than he had ever been in his life. The king said, and Kinvara then looked to the chest in the corner where the red dragon slept. Dorne won't be pleased with this, Ned Dane, especially, though I care not. The Dark Star was always a pain in the arse, and not a very good one at that, Arianne said with a chuckle at some jape. Only she understood. We intend to march on King's Landing, princess. Once it's fallen, we shall then make plans for retaking your homeland. You can, if you wish, march to Dorne and wait for us to join you, or march to King's Landing first. The choice is yours. The queen said, We'll march with you, your grace. The princess said, Fealty, princess, the king said, with a smirk. I have no kingdom, your grace, my fealty would not be that of Dorne's, but I offer both mine and Dorne's to you anyway. We accept the offer from the true ruler of Dorne, the queen said, and the smile on the princess's face was a full one. As the tall lady rose at a nod from the king and then escorted her from the tent, Kinvara stayed sitting and waited to be spoken to, the king turning to the queen and kissing her cheek before they looked her way. You say this Bellico is smart, Lady Kinvara, that he is wise? The king asked. He is, your grace. Yet he sends his men to die pointlessly. Why? The king asked, looking at her. He has power, your grace. He has some foresight. I don't know how much, but he knew enough to gather a force that would be able to take the temple. He knew to send Prince Quentyn and Malaklo to Dorne at just the right time, so they take it easily. I do not believe he wishes them to die pointlessly, but I cannot discern his motives either. Kinvara said frustratedly. Not even in the flames? The king asked, and she smiled at him, pleased he knew of her god's ways. Rosira sows only what is needed, your grace, but I shall look some more. Very well, look to King's Landing, Lady Kinvara, Bellico, Quentyn, and Malaklo can wait. "Look to King's Landing and tell us what you see," the queen said as Kinvara stood up. She heard the squeal from the red dragon, and then watched as it flew to the table, the king reaching down to grab some meat which he held up with a knife. After the queen bit it too, the red dragon used its flames to cook the meat and then moved to the queen. Kinvara watched as it rested its head on the queen's stomach. The sounds that came from it, ones of joy, and as she left the tent, she knew there was another little dragon soon to arrive. The Vale 305 AC. Lady Anya Waynwood. The Vale had almost fallen because of one red-headed trout, and she'd not allow another to come in and be its lady. Nor would she leave it in the hands of that idiot boy, who the more she saw of him, the more she was certain he was not Jon Arryn's son. Robert Arryn carried none of the man Lysa claimed to be his father in him, and just as little of Lysa herself, other than her idiocy. No, were she forced to wager, then she'd name him a mockingbird, and not a falcon. And even then he carried little of Littlefinger in him either. Harold was vain, cocky, not too smart. And she disliked his dalliance with the Royce girl. But he was malleable, and he was her key to the Vale itself. So she had waited and hoped that his sickly cousin would pass, only for him to grow stronger. She had prayed to the stranger to take him, only to have her prayers ignored, and so she'd instead begun to plot his downfall. Small doses at first, enough to leave him open to illness and sickness, and to allow for it to at least seem natural. It would have taken moons for him to pass, and since it was winter and they were stuck at the gates of the moon, she had felt she had more than enough time. Then Sansa Stark had arrived and begun to do what Robert had not and interfere in her domain. This mere slip of a girl had behaved as if she was already the Lady of the Vale, and had given each of them a glimpse into what it would be like should they be wed. She spoke as if she was an authority and as if she knew more than they, presenting her ideas as if they were ones that only she had thought of. The girls speaking of grain and storage as if they had never seen a winter before, talking of preparations to be made as if they were green summer children and she some wise sage. It was too much for her and for the other lords of the Vale, and so Anya had begun to think she may need to act more quickly. "That woman cannot be allowed to marry our lord," she said to Master, the lord nodding to her as she did so. "It's what he wishes for," Sir Simmons said. "And we've to go along with the wishes and whims of a boy on this," Lord Belmore said with a snort. "But what to do? Her brother is king in the north, and he is more than close to the Dragon Queen, given what Sir Davith said." Lord Hunter said, "For now we make it look as if we are welcoming our new lady." "We wait, my lords. For now," Anya said to nods of agreement. When the news came from the north of who Jon Snow truly was, and they'd seen the reaction from Sansa Stark, it had been the final straw. They would not have another Lysa Tully telling them what to do. And so Anya had sat and considered, and a plan was put into place. The boy was smothered in his sleep, according to the guard that had done so. It had happened not long after Sansa Stark had left the room. The next morning, when they found him, it was exactly as she had planned it. Lord Robert had clearly been killed, and had also been left in such a state that would show he had been engaged in nocturnal activities before he had died. Sansa had made a big mistake in giving in to his demands before they were wed. Not only was Lord Robert a boy who'd now gotten access to what all men wanted, he was a braggart too. There wasn't one person in the entire keep who didn't know what happened when he and his betrothed went to his room each night. Not one who wouldn't swear that Sansa Stark and he weren't engaged in more than just light conversation. That, how he was found, the stain on her dress that they hadn't even had to put there, all of that had been enough to force her to speak out in her defense. The silly girl digging herself even deeper with each word she said. "He forced me to do things. I didn't wish to. No. He made me. No, I didn't hate him for it. I was to be his wife." "No, you're twisting my words," I said. "I hated doing those things. Not that I hated Robert. I wished them to stop." No, you're doing it again. That's not what I said." She had sat and listened, as had the others, the words not helping the girl as she thought they would. And at a nod from her, the guards had left to bring the squid to them. Ian Greyjoy had saved the girl once before, and Anya knew he'd try to do this time too. Men were so predictable when they were in love, after all. It had gone just as she had predicted it would. The squid, upon seeing a distressed Sansa, had asked to speak to her, and Yer allowed it before she hit him with the truth of why they were here. Then she'd waited while he spoke to the girl softly, and when she saw her nod, Yer had smiled. The trial by combat that she wished for was agreed upon, and now she just had to ensure the outcome she wanted. It made her feel almost giddy the more she thought about it, the simplicity of her plan, aided by playing a game with people who really were out of their element. "Ser Varn, you shall represent the Vale," she said as the man stepped forward. "Theon Greyjoy, you shall represent Lady Sansa," she said, as Theon did likewise. And Anya looked to Nestor. "The fight is to the death. Let the gods be the judges this day." Nestor said, and Anya saw the nervous look on Sansa Stark's face. Ser Varn was a big man, bigger than Theon Greyjoy, but slower, and Anya looked on eagerly as the two came together. Varn's sword was blocked by Theon's shield, and then the squid launched his own attack, forcing the bigger man back as he swung far too powerfully. She looked to Harold, who nodded, and to Sansa Stark, who was holding her hands together in prayer. Anya smiling as the two men came together once more, the noise of the swords crashing together and ringing around the hall. The yawn slipped, and she heard Sansa's pained cry, but even she gave the squid credit for how quickly he rose back to his feet. He moved away from the slash aimed his way and almost drew Ser Varn onto him, the bigger man looking as if he was tiring as Theon blocked his blows, and backed away further. Anya grimaced when the cut almost caught Theon on the side, the squid lucky he had moved, or it would have been the end of him. The blow he aimed back in return, though, cost Ser Varn his shide and emboldened the squid to move forward. When the end came, it was quick, and Varn never saw it coming. A parry, a riposte, a slash to the arm, and then the leg, and finally a thrust of the sword into the exposed side of Ser Varn. She gasped, as did the others in the room. When Varn fell, Theon wasting no time to move to him, and with a slice of his sword, Varn's neck was cut and his blood was pooling on the floor. Anya looked to see Sansa Stark run to Theon, her arms around him as she spoke, and asked him if he was harmed. Greyjoy telling her he was not, but looking her way instead of at the girl. "You have been found innocent in the eyes of the gods, Lady Sansa. However, each lord and lady here knows the truth of your guilt." Anya said, "I am innocent, my lady," Sansa said, trying to sound unaffected, and yet the shallowness of her breathing was clear for all to see. "No matter, you are no longer welcome in the Vale. You and Greyjoy are hereby banished from ever setting foot in it again. You will both be escorted from our lands, never to return. Goodbye, Lady Sansa," she said, as she rose and walked from the hall. She stood on the battlements watching as the guards rode out the gate. Sansa Stark and Theon Greyjoy amongst them, and she smiled as she watched them go. Hearing the footsteps, she turned to see Harold walk her way, her former ward looking confusingly at her as he did so. He waited some time before he began to speak. Anya sure he was trying to figure out her mind before doing so, trying and failing to both her chagrin and amusement. "I don't understand," Harold said. "What would you have had me do? Kill the girl?" she asked. "Would that not have been better? She's nobody anymore," Harold said. "But her brother is the king, is he not?" she asked. "A king she's in conflict with," Harold said. "A king with a dragon who may hate his sister, may even, for all we know, wish her dead. But would he welcome us, being the ones to do so?" she asked. "It was legal," Harold said, looking at her, and Anya felt like grabbing him and shaking him to wake him up to the ways of the world. "It was a farce. You think I'd have picked a condemned low-born thief to act as a knight otherwise?" "No, but why?" he asked. And she just shook her head in disappointment and walked away from him. Men, most of them were fools she'd found in her time, some more foolish than others, and they couldn't see what was right in front of their eyes, unless it was a pretty girl with her skirts raised. Words would spread of the trial and what happened. People would make their own minds up about it, but most would see the smoke and not look for the fire. They'd see Sansa Stark and Theon Greyjoy and believe they got away with murder. They'd blame them for Robert Arryn's death and not look any closer at her or the Lords of the Vale. As for her brother, the king, he'd either welcome the fact they'd not killed his sister, or bemoan that she'd gotten away with her life. Either way, a man that already distrusted his sister so would believe in her lie and not his sister's truths. He'd look to the Vale and see them administering justice, and however he felt about his sister. How he felt about the Vale was something she could now predict. Anya smiled as she made her way to her room. Tomorrow they would ride south. They had a king to meet. Crownlands 305 AC. Jon Connington. Their horses were poor and even more so compared to the ones the Dothraki rode. Jon almost looking enviously at the men as they escorted them to the army that was now marching their way. He could see the nervousness on the faces of Belloq and the others, the worry about the reception they may receive clear in their expressions. His face bore a far different look, one of hope, eagerness, excitement. Jon feeling as if he was a young man once more and if he was heading to King's Landing for the first time and not riding away from it. When he saw the army truly, he looked at it with awe. The sheer mass of men, something that he'd never seen the likes of before. He'd marched with the Golden Company en masse, had seen a Dothraki horde, and had looked on as other companies had taken to the field. During the rebellion, he'd led a large force to try and take the Stony Sept and faced a larger force that had come from nowhere to rescue Robert Baratheon. All of that paled into comparison to the sight before him. Thousands upon thousands of Dothraki, unsullied, Dornishmen, Reachmen, even Westerland's men were riding his way. He heard them at first, the dragons flying over his head, and when he looked to them, he almost jumped from his horse to fall to his knees. They were real, they were true, the dragons had returned, he thought, as he looked at the figures on their backs. The silver hair of Daenerys stood out and showed her for the Dragon Queen. She was, but it was the dark hair of the man on the green dragon that he looked to most eagerly. Jon finally seeing his prince in the flesh, and cursing that he was on horseback, and the prince was in the sky. "The king," he said to the Dothraki, who was leading them towards the army. "Calver," the man replied with a smile. "Versal Wolf King, King Wolf." He smiled at that, and yet he wondered why he was not called the Dragon King. It was something to ponder, he thought, as they were led to the group of men that were leading the marching army. He recognized one of them as Varys and the other he assumed to be Ser Davos. Looking to the others, he could see one wearing Lannister colors, which surprised him, and as he looked closer, he saw there were some women among them too. The Dothraki leader motioned for him and the others to ride, and so he did. The group of men soon reaching the leading group, and Jon looking to see Varys smirk at him until he saw his face. The eunuch quickly changed his expression, and just as he was about to introduce himself, he heard the sound of horses riding his way. He looked over Varys' shoulder and saw a sight that brought a smile to his face. 3 men in white cloaks rode beside a man and a woman, a king and a queen, and as he looked closer, he could see a white wolf running alongside the king's horse. There were others in the group too, a young woman wearing breeches, a young man who looked like a lot like Sir Aetherdain, one that looked like Robert Baratheon, and yet it was to the king his eyes were drawn. Jon watched as the king slowed his horse and turned to his wife, smiling when he heard the laugh that came from Daenerys' lips. More so when the king leaned over from his horse to kiss her deeply, and then before he had time to adjust or settle, they were beside him, and he was looking at Targaryens for the first time in more years than he cared to count. "Your graces, Lord Jon Connington," Varys said, and he saw how they both looked somewhat pleased to see him. The king, though, was soon wearing an odd look on his face, which he wasn't sure how to take. "Lord Jon, it's good to meet you finally. Lord Varys has told me much about you, and I'm aware of your history with my father," the king said. "Your grace, it's an honor to finally meet you, truly, you too, your grace," he said with a nod to the queen. "Perhaps we should speak elsewhere, my love," the queen said, and he saw the king nod back to her. "Aye, we should, Ser Davos, continue the march. We'll ride on ahead and meet you where we'll camp for the night." The king said, "Your grace, is that wise?" the older man asked worriedly. "We've scouted far ahead, Sarkor. We're the only people on these roads for miles around. Besides, Rhaegal and Drogon will be with us all the way," the queen said, and Jon looked up to see the dragons in the sky. "As will we, Hax," the king said with a laugh, and Jon almost fell from his horse when the red dragon flew to the queen and landed on the horse in front of her, a worried, dark-skinned woman running towards them a few moments later. "Your grace, I'm sorry," the woman said, and Jon watched as the queen stroked the red dragon as if it was a small cat or pup, and shook her head, speaking softly to the dragon before the king looked at him. "Lord Jon, ride with us," the king said, and he nodded as almost the moment he said it, both he, the queen, and the girl in the breeches were laughing as they rode off. The king's guard, some Dothraki and others soon following behind them, as did Jon and his men. He recognized the stream that he found them stopped at. Jon finding himself smiling to see how carefree the king and queen seemed to be as they watched the white wolf swimming in it. the sound of their laughter pleasing him greatly when the wolf climbed out and shook his body, sprinkling them both with water. Daenerys looked so much like her mother that he almost expected to see the Scab King behind her, and while Aegon's coloring made him out a Stark, Jon could see so much of his father in him that he wondered how it had been kept secret. Had no one who knew Rhaegar seen the boy? Was he kept isolated from any who could recognize the truth in his features? Or was it simply that being raised as a bastard meant no one spared him a second glance? Just thinking of the latter made him want to kill Eddard Stark, to dig up his bones and bring him back to life just so he could kill him himself. He had known the truth and had sent, or at the very least allowed, Rhaegar's son to go the wall. Was his hatred of Rhaegar that deep, or was it his love of the stag that had seen him pick him over his own blood? He felt his anger begin to rise, and it was only when he saw the king being knocked to the ground by the white wolf and heard the laughter grow even louder that it receded. Jon looking on as the king rose, and both he and Daenerys walked his way. "Your Grace," Jon said, dropping to a knee. "Rise, Lord Connington, there is much my husband and I wish to discuss with you." Daenerys said, and he looked to see her staring at him. "Ask me anything, Your Grace," he said, as he stood to his feet. "The Golden Company, Lord Jon," Aegon said, "turned on us, Your Grace. How our plans were found out, I do not know. But we were attacked, myself and the men you saw with me are the only ones of the captains to make it out alive." Jon said, hoping they believed his words. "Strickland?" Aegon said, and it caught him so by surprise that it took him a moment to realize that he was asking if he lived rather than had it been him who attacked him. "Strickland is a toad, Your Grace. A craven and a coward who cares more for gold than anything else. Whether he knew the company was going to go against him, or whether he simply did as the Queen asked, I cannot tell. But he holds Blackfire, and so the company will follow him." Jon said, almost spitting as he thought of homeless Harry. "And should he lose Blackfire?" Daenerys asked. "Then they'll turn on him as some would if they saw my other captains and me, Your Grace." "Cersei Lannister. Lord Jon, she and Euron Greyjoy. Varys told me they were close. I need to know how close." Aegon asked. "They were lovers, Your Grace. Reluctant at first, but Lysano informed me that something changed between them and they were very close by the time Euron sailed from King's Landing." "Lysano?" Daenerys asked. "Lysano Mar, the company's spymaster, Your Grace," Jon said as he looked from Daenerys to Aegon. "Is he amongst the men you escaped with?" Daenerys asked, and Jon nodded, seeing the smile on Aegon's face. A smile that once again made his heart still. "We shall need to speak to him, Lord Jon. Him and the other men you escaped with." Aegon said, "Of course, Your Grace." "You were hand to my father, were you not?" Daenerys asked, and Jon sighed before he answered. "I was Your Grace. I wished to serve your brother, not your father. Your Grace. I believed in serving. Your Grace, I was doing so, but I know all I need to of my father, Lord Connington." Daenerys said, her lips almost curled up in a snarl. "My wife tells me that she and my uncle met with the Golden Company many years ago. Lord Jon, that they met with them and were laughed at, ignored and belittled." Eorn said, his eyes almost a shade of indigo that he remembered all too well. "They did, Your Grace. I was part of the company at the time, far lower than I rose to, and yet I knew of their visit," Jon said, looking to the ground. "Lord Varys tells me that you are a leal man to my family. Most of all, and yet when a princess and a prince of House Targaryen came your way, you ignored them. Why?" Aegon asked Jon, watching as he took his wife's hand in his own as he did so. "Viserys always showed signs, Your Grace, and Daenerys, her Grace, was a woman." Jon said, and saw the flicker of Aegon's eyes, and what looked to be flame growing behind them. It unnerved him for a moment, and so he didn't hear Aegon speak until he repeated himself. "My wife is a queen, Lord Jon, a dragon queen who has brought the dragons back to this world, who then gathered the largest army the world has ever seen, and without whom the world would have fallen to an army. It was ill-equipped to stop." Aegon said, his pride clear in his tone, and yet there was an anger there too, an accusation. "Aegon," he heard Daenerys say, her hand rubbing her husband's hand as she did so. "But she is a woman, and we live in a world that may see that as a reason why she should not rule. Our own family believed this, and it caused us to almost be brought to our knees. So I'll not blame you for such outdated thinking. I will, however, warn you from it. My wife and I will rule together. Lord Jon equals both in name and role. There will be no acceptance of those who look to me before her. No place at our table for those who think a king better than a queen. We would find a place at that table for you and we would ask you to be a part of the world. My wife and I intend to build together, but only if you understand that truth. Again said as Jon went to his knees again, I do your grace. I give you my oath that I do. Her grace and you, your grace, I would serve you both equally and without favor. I give you my oath on that. Jon said almost pleadingly as he looked at them. When we accept that oath, Lord Connington, and when we name our small council, we would ask you to serve on it. We already have a hand and a master of whisperers, but we are in need of a master of laws. Arise, Lord Jon Connington, as a member of our small council. Daenerys said, and he did so, nodding eagerly, looking to them both as he felt Aegon's hand on his shoulder. Could you tell me of my father, Lord Jon? Aegon said. The king had now gone, and the son of his silver prince was who stood in front of him. It would be an honor, your grace, Jon said, smiling. Crownlands 305 AC. Davos. They were camped no more than a day or so from King's Landing, and Davos, as was his wont to do, was walking the camp and thinking of the battle soon to come. It may not be on the morrow that it would actually take place, but be it then, the day after, or the day after that, a battle was soon to occur, and he felt as nervous as he ever did in knowing that Blackwater Bay, the Battle of the Bastards, the Battle of Winterfell, even if he'd not actually been there when it had taken place, each of them had caused him sleepless nights. The battle for King's Landing, it seems, would be causing him the same, and as he walked over the hill and looked down on the camp below him, he wondered how many others felt the same as he did. He hoped the king and queen took their comfort in each other, as they more than any would need to be fully rested. As for the Reachmen, they did as Reachmen did, and celebrated by almost having a feast on a battlefield, the sight of it stirring dark memories within him. The Dornishmen, too, celebrated, while the few Northmen with them and the Westerlands men looked to be enjoying a Dothraki celebration. Davos wouldn't begrudge Kano and the others the night they had planned. These men had fought and bled with his king and queen. They derived far more than most. Looking to the unsullied tents, he chuckled. They didn't celebrate, not before they won, and not even after. The men were far too disciplined for that. He heard the crack of the branch, and he turned to see Aegon walk his way. Ghost was walking by his side, and Davos laughed, knowing it had been the king and not the wolf who had made the noise. Your grace, he said with a nod. Aegon Davos, the king said, and he nodded. Aegon, he said, and saw the smile on the king's face. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, Aegon said as he looked down on the camp. The Reachmen don't need an excuse, and the Dothraki are much like the free folk, are they not? He said, and saw an almost wistful look come over the king's face. I find I miss Tormund, Davos, and yet I am glad he's not here at the same time. Cagayan said, and Davos laughed. I miss the crazy fucker too, but I'm glad he's elsewhere. He and his people deserve some peace. As do we all, though it won't be something I'll see for many a year, I fear. Azir said before laughing at some thought or other. Are gags in? He asked, confused. I fought, I lost, and now I rest. But you, Lord Snow, you'll be fighting their battles forever, Aegon said, and Davos looked at him and saw a smirk on his face. Aegon? Thorn, Ser Davos. Those were his last words to me, and how true they were, though I think he meant wildings and not the gods. Accent. I don't understand, Davos said. Walk with me, Davos. I have a story I must tell someone. And be it good fortune or ill that you were here, it was to you I wished to tell it anyway. Aegon said, and Davos nodded. They walked further from the camp, Aegon not saying anything for some time, and Davos looked to see what looked to be warring emotions on his face. That alone was strange enough, as from the first time he'd met the boy, he'd found it was only his eyes that truly showed what he was feeling. When he did speak, he caught him so by surprise that Davos almost jumped. The sound of the voice seemed to be so loud in the quietness of the night, and yet he knew Aegon was speaking softly. When King's Landing falls, Sir Davos, it won't be the end of things. Durin Essos, my wife and I have more fights to come. It's why I was brought back, I believe. Why I was truly brought back. Not just to face the Night King and beat him, that could have been done without me, but to end him and together with my wife, finish what she started, Aegon said. You intend to free more slaves? Davos asked. No, we're going to free them all, Davos, each and every one of them. Aegon said determinedly. But that could take, he said, and then laughed, the truth of Axon's words coming to him then. Aye, forever. Aegon said as he bid Davos sit with him. The two of them sat on some rocks, close together but facing each other, and Davos was thankful for the fullness of the moon, as he could see Aegon's face clearly when he began to speak. I'm going to tell you a tale, Davos. A tale that's unbelievable, impossible, terrible, and true. A tale of a life lived that ended alone and broken, a life filled with regret, pain, guilt, and sadness. Cursed is the kinslayer, Davos, and they cursed me for true, and though I deserved to die that way, it was not to be my end. Ograt said. Davos looked to see Aegon's face was now covered in shadow, as a cloud or something else blocked the moon's light. When it passed, he saw there were tears falling down Aegon's cheeks, and he had little idea that his own were soon to follow. He listened as he was told a tale of a wolf who had stood silently and allowed the rest of his pack to tear into a dragon's body, of a lion that was allowed to take his own piece, and of the spider who spun his web and trapped the dragon inside. All the while, the silent wolf stood by and did nothing, until at the end it then decided to tear out the dragon's heart and feasted upon it. By the time Iakin was done, Davos was wiping his own eyes, and through them he looked contemptuously at the boy who had finally taken the dragons from this world. It took him a moment to realize that this was not that boy had died long ago, and the one who sat in front of him was no longer a silent wolf. Instead, it was a dragon that looked his way. A dragon who'd roared and let the wolves know that should they try to feast on one dragon, they'd face another. A dragon who had taken a spider and threatened to set fire to his web should he try to spin it in the wrong place, and who had shown a lion what a true roar sounds like. You need to tell her, Aegon, he said, rising to his feet. Aye, but not today, Aegon said. No, lad, not today, Davos said as he walked over to the boy, the king, the wolf who was now a dragon. Aegon said, and Davos grabbed him and looked him in the eye. You're a dragon, Aegon. Go be a dragon, he said, before he hugged him, feeling the boy hug him back. The two of them standing there for some time before he finally let him go. Thank you, Davos, Aegon said, and he nodded to him as he walked away, the white wolf walking with him. Davos looked to them both as they walked, and he smiled. The world needed the dragons, and now they had two, soon to be three, and though there were wars to come and battles to be fought, he'd fight by their side gladly. Walking back to the camp, he ignored the revelry around him and walked to his tent, laying down on his bed, and he was unsurprised when sleep came. Macreen 305 AC. Dario. He looked out on the bay at the ships and wondered where so many had come from, his eyes searching the sails to see it was from Yunkai, Nugius, and Astapor. His brow furrowed as he had thought they'd taken all their ships. As he held the Marish-Eye and looked at more of the ships, he sighed when he saw the Voluntean sails. And he knew then they were fucked. There were no dragons to come to their rescue, and he had but 4,000 men to hold this city. As he moved from the balcony and made his way through the pyramid, he was soon joined by one of his captains, the man bringing him the news that he knew sealed their fate. How many? He asked the clearly disturbed man. 20,000 at least. Fuck, Dario said. What are we to do, Commander? The man asked, as Dario tried to think. What can we do? We fight, he said, and the man nodded as he ran off to prepare the men. He called for a servant and sent her to find Dano, the girl running off to do as he asked while Dario walked to his room. Once he reached it, he took off the silks he wore and dressed in his armor before moving to the statue and pushing it onto its side. Reaching into the hollowed-out base, he took out the two bags, one full of coin and the other gems, and he tied them to his belt before he walked from the room. There are too many. You can't mean to fight them all, Dano said, and Dario looked at his second-in-command. The Narvosi speaking the truth, as always. I'm not fighting them. They'll kill us all. Once the city has fallen, we'd end up as heads on stakes, or as gifts sent to my queen, and when she looks upon my face again, it'll be attached to my body. On that you can count. Dario said, and Dano nodded. Your orders, Dario? Dano asked. Take the best of our men, gather horses, food, whatever wealth you can carry, and ride to the South Tower. I'll meet you there. Dario said. You're not coming now? Dano asked, confused. I need to lead the men to fight before we can run. Dario said, and Dano nodded as he set off to do as he was bid. It took him some time to walk to the entrance of the pyramid, Dario in no hurry, or at least making it look that way. His men needed to see him calm and composed, so they'd do as he asked them. Otherwise they'd flee, and he'd have no time to make good his escape. Mounting his horse, he rode with his escort to the docks, the ship's closer now, but still some distance away, which gave him time. Make sure the fire arrows are ready, The scorpions. Use the firebolts, he shouted, as men rushed to make ready. Nikos, Jorius, you have command. I'll return once I've seen to the main gates, he said, as the two men nodded as he rode away. He knew he was leaving them to their deaths, but the simple truth was that many men would die here today, and those who did not would be in chains by the time night fell. Better for them to go out with their swords in their hands and hope in their hearts, Daario thought. Reaching the main gate, he dismounted his horse and ran up the steps to the walls. Entering the guard tower, he was saluted by the men, and he could see how relieved they were to see him. The oil, is it boiled? He asked. It is, Commander. Arrows, you have enough, he asked, and they nodded. Vansalo, you man the scorpions, Dracarys. Adoro, the ballistas, he said, clapping his hands together to get the men moving. Ario, with me, he said, walking from the guard tower. He walked with the younger man, who was clearly nervous. He was unbloodied, and though well-trained, had never even seen a true battle. The men will need supplies, Ario. I want you to go and gather food and water. Make sure there is enough to last a day and a night, he said, looking to the boy. You believe it'll be over so quickly? Ario asked hopefully. It will now go. I must ride to the others. He mounted up and rode to 3 more guard towers, stopping to talk to forces that would hold the gate. And by the time he'd done his rounds, the battle had begun. Climbing to the top of the walls, he gave the orders for the arrows to fly and heard the cheers. When men fell, Daario, shaking his head at the folly in their thinking that things would be that easy. I must go and see to the men on the docks. Keep firing, I shall return, he said, and ignored the cheers as he walked down to his horse. The ride thought the city showed that while the men on the walls were still feeling hopeful, the people of Meereen were not. Daario saw them look to the sky. Hope and fear were both equally present, and he knew what it was they were seeking. Your queen will not abandon you, be it today, tomorrow, weeks or moons from now, she will return, he said. Nusia. Nusia. He ignored the cheers, the cries. Riding hard, he soon reached the turnoff to the docks and looked down at the battle that was taking place. Closing his eyes, he told himself that it wasn't just his own arse he was saving by doing what he was about to do. Riding hard and fast, he soon reached the south tower to find Dono and 20 men waiting. Daario was pleased to see Dono holding the reins of the spare horse in his hands, and he quickly jumped off his tired one and mounted the fresh new one. We ride to attack from the rear. We'll give these fuckers a surprise. They'll never forget, Daario said loudly for the men in the tower's benefit. Open the gate. Dono shouted. They rode out to cheers, and soon the walls of Meereen were far behind them. It took them a day and night to reach the boats, and another hour to row to the ship. The Dragon's Kiss, he had named it after his queen, and it had been one of the first things he'd done as governor of Meereen. He had known this day could come, though he had hoped it would be many years from now, and that she'd be back in his bed by then. Westeros was not where she belonged, and married to some fool of a Westerosi was no life for the queen of his heart. As the sails were readied and the ship began to sail, Daario looked back at the flames in the distance. Meereen burned today, but soon enough it would be Essos that felt the fire. True fire. He walked to the captain of the ship. The man waiting for his instruction as they sailed from Meereen, looking to him, Daario smiled. We sail for Westeros. We sail to our queen, he said as he walked past him and down to his cabin. King's Landing 305 AC. Dainty. Laying in her husband's arms, she could almost forget they were about to attack a city. She listened as he spoke softly to the dragon that lay on the bed beside them and to the one that grew inside of her. Aegon telling them both of each other and Dany enjoying the story as much as she felt that both dragons were. The smile on her face was true as she listened while Aegon spoke of Lodjerkana to Rosiera Ada and of Rosiera to the red dragon. Yes, little dragon, she's red and she's beautiful, Aegon said as Liagas chirped her agreement. Of course she'll ride you when she's old enough. You are her dragon. Are you not? Rosiera said, and Dany felt Lagerstrex rub her head softly against her swollen belly. I think both dragons wish to sleep, my love. Dany said, and she swore Lurgierax shook her head as she did so. You've heard your mother, little dragon, time to sleep. You too. No, sleep, Aegon said, and Dany chuckled, as he argued with the red dragon, who finally flew to his arms and allowed him to rise and to place her in her chest, a chest that was getting more cramped for her by the day. She watched as Aegon made sure the dragon was comfortable, and then he climbed back into the bed beside her, Dany snuggling up close to him and enjoying the comfort of his arms. I fear that when our daughter is born I'll lose you to her, she said with a chuckle. Never, Aegon said, kissing her. Perhaps sometimes, he said a moment later, making her laugh. Are you sure about this, tomorrow? She asked, and he nodded. You heard what Melora said, Kinvara confirmed it. Also. Aegon said. It's too big a risk, Aegon. We could just take the city, she said worriedly. It's a risk, to be sure, but Arya will play her part, and Jon seems more than eager. It's too big a risk to you, she said, looking at him. Everything we do from here on in is a risk. This isn't the end of things, Targaryen. It's not the last battle we must face. Here, Dorne Essos, we have many fights to come, and we will need as many on our side as we can have. Wildfire almost destroyed our family once. I won't give it the chance to do so again, Aegon said, determinedly. Promise me that you'll return to me. Promise me, she said, looking at him. I promise I'll return to you always. I promise I will see my daughter born. I will see all our children born. We will grow old together, you and me. And one day I'll see what wrinkles look like on that beautiful face of yours. I'll see the silver turn to gray, and we'll watch as our children marry and have children of their own. He said, kissing her softly. We will, she said determinedly. She woke the next morning and was relieved to see his arms around her. Dany, looking to the light that shined in through the tent and rising to her feet, Aegon mumbling something as she moved to her clothing and began to dress. Your Grace, Lord Varys wishes to speak to you. Jorah said, when she reached the opening of the tent. Have him brought to me, she said, looking back inside and glad to see that Aegon was still asleep. She walked with Sir Brienne, leaving Sir Jaime at the tent, and soon enough Varys and Syria were walking her way. The Master of Whisperers looking eager to speak to her, and Dany finding herself more than eager to speak to him also. Then, Your Grace, an army marches our way from the Stormlands under Lord Edric Storm, Varys said. Ally or enemy, Lord Varys? She asked. Princess Arianne believes him to be an enemy, Your Grace. But I disagree. Lord Edric has taken back the Stormlands in his family name. It's true, but I believe he means to offer his men to us, Varys said. Family name, Lord Varys, is Storm, not a bastard name, she asked curiously. It is my lady, however. Lord Edric's father was Robert Baratheon, Varys said, surprising her. Sir Brienne, have Gendry brought to my tent, she said, and Brienne went to move only for Varys to speak. I'm afraid he left with Lady Arya, Your Grace, Forres said, and Dany nodded. She looked to Varys and then to the Dragon Guard, nodding to Brienne and Jorah to gave her some room to speak to the man privately. Once they had, she moved closer to the eunuch, his perfume even more overpowering than her own. Cersei Lannister, Lord Varys, is it true she's a woman controlled by her lusts? She asked. Very much so, Your Grace. Lord Tyrion, he said, stopping when he said the traitor's name. Continue, Lord Varys, she said. Lord Tyrion would often say it about her. You know of her, and so I may, of course, but there were many others, Your Grace. And my brother? She asked. Was the love of her life, Your Grace, he said to Nads. I think you, Lord Varys, she said, as he moved away. By the time Aegon was up, they were ready to give a show of force, the likes of which King's Landing had never seen before. Firstly, though, they had a need to deal with a lord who'd come to pledge his swords and fealty to them. Dany looked to Aegon, who sat drumming his fingers on the table nervously, and it worried her to see him so. She was about to say something when Varys escorted the lord in, Dany looking at the man and seeing the resemblance to Gendry immediately. His beard was the only true difference, and she remembered Aegon telling her that Robert Baratheon bore a similar one. Lord Edric Storm, Your Grace, Varys said, and she looked to Aegon, who was staring at the man, an odd expression on her husband's face, and one she didn't understand until she saw how Lord Edric was looking at her. Your Grace, Lord Edric said, and Dany could feel the jealousy that came from Aegon when the man kissed her offered hand, finding that she enjoyed that jealousy more than a little. Lord Edric, you've come to pledge your fealty? Aegon asked more brusquely than she expected, jealous or no. I have you, Grace, to the true Queen and King of Westeros. Edric said, and Dany wasn't surprised to see him look more to her than Aegon when he said it. And what is it you seek in return for your fealty? Dany asked before Aegon could, My house and yours. Your Grace, we go back to the Conqueror himself. My father rose for what he believed to be a true reason, and while I am his son, I am not him, Edric said. Be thankful that you're not, Aegon said, glaring at the man. I would renew House Baratheon's loyalty to the crown, but I am a Strom, your grace, a bastard, Edric said, looking to Aegon, and Dany moved her hand to her husband's thigh to calm the anger she saw in his eyes. You wish to be legitimized? Aegon asked, and named Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, your grace. Edric said, looking at her once more. In return for your fealty? Aegon asked. In return for that, and my army, your grace. Edric said with a smile. She looked to Aegon to see if he wished her to deny him. It was clear he was disrespecting her husband, and the little bit of a thrill she had gotten from knowing that Aegon could be jealous over her was now gone. Should he wish it of her, she'd strip this man of all that he desired and see him brought low without a second thought. Aegon, though, nodded, and Dany looked to the man and smiled, seeing how it was interpreted almost immediately. We welcome your fealty, Lord Baratheon, and your army. We'll have the oath swearing once the throne is taken, but for now, you and your lords should make ready. We're to parley with Cersei Lannister before the day ends, Dany said, and the Lord rose, and seemed put out that Dany didn't do likewise or offer him her hand. She waited until he was gone from the tent, and looked to see Aegon staring at the empty space he just stood at. That man is a fool, she said to a chuckle. What? She asked, confused. Like father, like son, Aegon said, and she frowned, not understanding, only for Aegon to explain a moment later. Another Baratheon who wants a woman he cannot have, Aegon said, and something in the way he said it almost made her melt. He cannot, she said as they both rose to their feet. He cannot. You are mine, Dany, Aegon said, kissing her deeply. I am yours, and you are mine. Aegon Targaryen, she said when they were done. King's Landing 305 AC. Aegon, Devos, Sandor, Ayaya, Gendry, John Connington, and the other captains of the Golden Company had left in the middle of the night their destination and orders known only to him, Dany, and Varys. Now, as they rode to the parley, he wondered if he was doing the right thing and if sending them was the right thing. Looking to Dany, he gave her his most reassuring look, but he knew that nothing he said or did this day would reassure her. That wouldn't come to pass until the day was over. Lord Leighton and his heir Sir Baelor, Lord Rowan and Sir John Fossaway, Princess Arianne, Sir Daemon Sand, and her cousins along with Lord Ned Dane, Lord Yedric Storm, and some knights and lords he didn't know and hadn't had a chance to meet, and finally Lord Varys, Lady Melora, Lady Kinvara, the Dragon Guard, and Ghost. The party that rode towards the meeting spot was large, and yet, when they arrived, Cersei looked only at him. Axelin looked to Melora and Kinvara, both of them nodding at the same time, and so he turned back to the woman who had named herself Queen and smiled at her. The look that appeared on her face was one that he knew well, and he breathed a sigh of relief at that. Dismounting, he allowed Ser Jorah to help his wife down rather than he, Aegon not even looking Dany's way, as he instead stared at Cersei and smiled once more. Her Grace Cersei Lannister, Queen of the Andals, the Rhynar and the First Men, Lady of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, do hereby order your armies to stand down and halt this attempt at usurping of her rightful place on the Iron Throne. The man wearing the pin of the hand said, I am a king. I give and do not follow orders. Yagan said, and he swore he could see the almost giddy look on Cersei's face when he said it. Then perhaps you and I should negotiate as equals, your grace, Cersei said, rising to her feet. His grace is not the only one you need to negotiate with, Cersei glanced at her. Dany said angrily, and Aegon turned and glared at her, silencing her as he did so. I can speak for myself, he said firmly. I am willing to negotiate with her grace, Aegon said with a polite bow, and Cersei smiled. The voices rose behind him. Dany, Arianne, Lord Leighton, Mor, and then the dragon roared, Rhaegal flying over the meeting point and letting his displeasure be felt. Aegon glanced at Kinvara and Melora, and despite wishing to look to her and let her know the mummery was working, he ignored Dany as he then looked directly into Cersei's eyes. Silence, or it'll not only be my dragon you have to face, Aegon said, and he looked on as Cersei breathed deeply. Your Grace, perhaps we should speak in a more private setting, Cersei said as she licked her lips, and he nodded. Your Grace, surely not. You cannot do this. What madness is this? Varys said, and Aegon turned quickly, the sword in his hand, and pointed at Varys' neck before anyone could move. Never speak to me of madness. I am my father's son, Lord Varys, not my grandfather's, he said, as Varys gulped. He turned back and sheathed his sword, before untying his belt and handing it to Ser Jorah. Cersei offering him her arm, which he took as they both began to walk into the city. Aegon looked to the walls and saw the scorpions, then to the soldiers of the Golden Company as they walked the streets. When he heard the gates close behind him, he closed his eyes and prayed to the gods who'd brought him back. "Let me see the morrow. Let me see my wife again," he said softly in his head, before he leaned closer to whisper in Cersei's ear. "You truly look a queen today," he said, and he felt her shiver as his breath brushed over her ear. King's Landing, 3:05 AC. Melora. Clarity was something she was beginning to enjoy. Hearing one voice in her head instead of many was such a relief to both her senses and her sanity. Just knowing that the visions you saw were ones that were true and not something made up to fool you or confuse you or to drive you mad was something she welcomed. As was having a purpose, and so when the king and queen had asked her to look to King's Landing, she had done so willingly. What she had seen had scared and terrified her at first, until she'd then been shown another way, and while that way also scared her, it excited her also. To go from a situation where countless thousands of people, where a dragon and people that the king and queen cared for would fall, to one where few would, was a clear enough sign to her of why she was to be by their side. To then have her vision confirmed by a red priestess was a sign that it was not only her gods that were invested in their success. "I saw King's Landing awash in green flames. Your grace, I saw Rhaegal fall into them and burn, and I saw many men fall," Melora said as she looked to the king and queen. "Lady Kinvara," the queen asked, as her husband reached out to touch her hand. "I saw the same, my queen. I saw those with you burn amongst many people of the city. Ser Davos, Ser Jaime, Ser Jorah, and Ser Brienne, his grace's sister, and the blacksmith and the white wolf, all fell, as did the green dragon." Kinvara said, "My wife, Aile," the king asked, and both she and Kinvara shook their heads. "I did not see your fate, my king, nor her grace's," Melora said as Kinvara agreed with her. "So we attack, and we lose most of our men and those we care about. Is there another way?" the queen asked worriedly. "Cersei Lannister is the key, your grace. She must be sidelined, and it's only his grace who can get close enough to do so," Kinvara said as Melora looked on. "What? How?" the queen asked, and Melora told her. She knew there had been arguments both in front of them and when they had left. It pained her that her words had caused those arguments. But the things she'd seen had been clear, and after she had spoken to Kinvara once again to find that she too agreed, she felt the better for it. Melora looked on while the mummery was played out. The king had made other plans, and there were those not here who would play their roles in what was to come. The city, however, would stand. The dragons would live, and the king and queen would reign. Of that she had no doubt. Melora looked to her father as the king walked towards the city, his eyes both on Aegon and on her at the same time. And she saw the relief on his face when she nodded to him. She listened as the queen quietened all those around her who were arguing, and as she bid them join her in her tent so that she could explain what was going on. Melora and Kinvara both would be needed, and so she looked to the Red Priestess and nodded as they began to walk away from the meeting place. When she had first gotten her senses back, as the voices in her head had all faded away to just the one, and she had been shown the future she was to help bring about, Melora had asked and been told the why of things. How they had made a mistake and left the choosing of who came next to a man who was ill-equipped to do so. She'd been told that he had thought it was the bonds of blood that would be needed for what was to come, and so had chosen a boy who shared blood with the prince that was promised. A boy who turned out to have his own agenda and wishes and who had corrupted what the three-eyed raven was supposed to be. To watch and never interfere, to remember and yet not take part. That had been the mistake they'd made, and it was one they would never make again. Soon she'd have all the powers that the three-eyed raven had, she'd have control over them, and just like with the Red Priestess and the mission she was on from her god, Melora was on one from her own. It was one she wouldn't fail, and as she entered the tent and took her place with Kinvara behind the queen, it was one she relished. "Be seated," the queen said, and Melora watched as the Princess of Dorne, the Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands, and the Warden of the West took their seats. "Your Grace, what just happened? Why is His Grace speaking in such a way, and why is he negotiating with Cersei Lannister of all people?" Princess Arianne asked her voice. Angry, but at events, and not at the queen, Melora believed. Do you know anything of the powers of the Red Priest, Princess Arianne, or what a green seer is? Do any of you? The queen asked. I know what a green seer is, your grace, her father said, and Melora smiled at him as he did so. Power? Green seer? Sir Davin asked confusedly. Lady Kunvora, the queen said, turning to the Red Priestess. Rosier gifts some of his faithful with the power to discern things, Sir Davin to see things in the flames. Kunvora said simply, and to the point, the future. You're saying you see the future? Sir Davin scoffed. The past, the present, the future. I saw a man who, though he wishes to be married, feared the lady didn't see him as he did her. A man who worried that he'd not find that which he now believes he found. Kinvora said cryptically, and Melora saw Sir Davin gulp. Lady Melora, the queen said, turning to her. A green seer is gifted by the old gods to see things also. We don't see them in the flames, but we see as Lady Kinvara does. Melora said, Lord Leighton was aware of my husband's truth long before anyone else in Westeros, due to Lady Melora's abilities. Is that not so, my lord? The queen asked her father. It was your grace my daughter has a gift, one I don't understand, but one I believe in truly, her father said, looking to her. And this has to do with what just happened. How? Princess Arianne asked. She listened as the queen spoke to them about what they'd seen. Melora watching the worried looks on their faces when the mention of wildfire was made. Sir Davin more than any looking worried by the thoughts of it, though her father's look was just as panicked. When they told them of the mummery the king had just portrayed, she could see the impressed looks, though there was confusion too. Princess Arianne again being the one who asked the question that was no doubt on others' minds. But how can you be certain that Cersei won't just harm the king, or take him hostage? The princess asked, and Melora was surprised at how concerned she seemed to be by the idea of it, something that the queen seemed equally surprised by. Lady Melora, the queen said, looking to her. Cersei Lannister's greatest wish was to marry Prince Rhaegar. It was her dream, and even now, all these years later, she still holds a drawing she made as a child of them together as her most treasured possession. Azur's put paid to that ever becoming a reality, and so, for all of her life, it's been something that was unobtainable to her. Like with every person who wants what they cannot have, it becomes an obsession, a goal that must be achieved. Melora said, Prince Rhaegar is dead, my lady. Sir Davin said, his son, however, is not, the queen said to nods as it dawned on them what the king planned. She watched as they were given orders to ready the attack, to make it look as if it was imminent and that all they were waiting for was the word to do so. Her father looked at her and she shook her head, letting him know that she was needed here, and so she would speak to him later. The queen didn't wait too long after they had gone to speak, and when she did, she made her meaning very clear. I like this knot. Though you both claim it necessary, and I fear for those I lead, my husband, the father of my child, is at risk because of what both of you claim to be the only way to succeed. Should he fall, should I lose the man I love, then I swear to you both, my dragons will see to your ends, the queen said, and she looked to Kinvara to see there was no worry or doubt in her face. And she smiled as there was none in her heart, also. King's Landing 305 AC. Ancelia! Jon had come to her and spoken about the tunnels under the Red Keep, asking her how well she knew them and was she certain that she could navigate them. Though she was certain she could, she still welcomed the map that Lord Viserys had drawn for her, as well as having Ghost with her too. The two boats had landed in the cove at the hour of the wolf, and Arya felt that to be most apt. The wolves were finally back in King's Landing after all, and this time they had brought dragons with them. Lord Connington and his men made their way into the city while she led Sandor, Gendry, and a group of Unsullied deeper into the cove. Andorys, smiling when she saw the way in, was just as she remembered it. And after Gendry lit some torches, they began to move through the tunnels. Once or twice she almost got lost, and she found that Varys' map was not as helpful as she'd hoped it would be. Ghost, though, was more than its equal. The White Wolf refusing to go down some tunnels and leading them down others instead. When they finally reached their destination, she climbed up the ladder and opened the small hatch. Bidding the others to remain, she entered the room and was soon looking around the queen's chambers, Arya sighing when she found them empty. A part of her wished to just wait here for Cersei, to kill the woman as soon as she saw her and end it all, then and there. Yet for whatever reason, she was not here, and she wondered why that was. Climbing back down the ladder, she told the others they were where they needed to be. Arya then taking a seat beside Gendry and across from Sandor. "Is it the Queen's chambers that are above us?" Gendry asked. It is. She's not there, though. Lucky for her, Arya said, her annoyance clear. "Bloodthirsty fucker, aren't ya?" the Hound said with a chuckle. "She deserves her blood spilled," she said to a nod from him. "Aye, no cunt has ever deserved it more, apart from her son or her father. Maybe her brother, too, the little fuck," the Hound said. "What about your own brother?" she asked, knowing how he felt about the mountain that rides. "His blood only deserves to be spilled by me," he replied, his voice determined, and Arya didn't need to look at him to see the expression on his face. It was one she herself had worn for those on her list over the years. "Do you really think your brother should do this?" Gendry asked, looking at her, the darkness barely broken by the torch he still held in his hand. "Jon is the best person for this. He killed the Night King," she said, misunderstanding what Gendry meant. "I mean with him being the king. Should he be risking himself so?" Gendry asked, and Arya felt a shiver down her spine. "I tried to tell him not to. I told him I could do it. I have the training, but," she said, her voice shaky. "What did he say?" Gendry asked. "He said that he'd not send his little sister into a danger that he was afraid to face himself," she said with a smile as she remembered the look on her brother's face when they'd spoken. "I need to ask him about us," Gendry said as she glared at him. "Why? He doesn't decide what I do or who I wed," she said angrily. "He's the king, Arya, and your brother. I know no man tells you what to do, and from all you've said about him, I doubt he'd even try." She chuckled as he said that, as she knew he was right. She and Jon had already spoken on her future, and he'd made it clear it was her future. Her choice, and whatever she chose, he'd love her and still be her brother after it. "Then why?" she asked. "I'm a bastard, Arya," Gendry began. "That doesn't matter. Jon thought he was one for all his life, and he wouldn't care," she said with certainty. "I'm a bastard who's to marry the king's sister, the Princess Arya of Winterfell," Gendry said. "I'm not a fucking princess or a lady, for fuck's sake. I thought you of all people would understand that," she said, frustrated. "I understand, but you are both, whether you like it or not. It's how people will see you and how they see me. I need to speak to him, to let him know that I love his sister, and despite my birth, no man is better for her than I." Arya reached out her hand and took his, holding it tightly as they sat in the dark. He was her choice, who she wished to be with, and while she still didn't wish to be the Lady of Winterfell and to rule the North, she did have a plan for their future, and one that fixed the problem of the Stark in Winterfell. "If you two are going to fuck, do it somewhere else," the Hound said, and she tried to kick the man only to find he was too far away from her. Instead, she leaned against Gendry's shoulder, and soon she was drifting to sleep. Her dreams were of woods and a large wolf leading a pack through them as it hunted for food to bring back to its pups. She found herself smiling as she watched through Nymeria's eyes, the 3 dark wolf pups all eating well as their mother looked on. Arya, feeling her wolf's happiness as it watched over them. While she had missed her every day since she'd seen her on the road to Winterfell, she knew that Nymeria had chosen her own path, her own life, and had done so on her own terms. Her wolf was everything she had ever wished herself to be, and she took comfort in that. "It's time," she heard the voice say as she was woken. Arya looking to see Gendry standing with his hand out to help her up. "How do you know?" she asked as she stood up and wiped the sleep from her eyes. Gendry motioned the ghost, who was looking up at the hatch, Arya seeing an almost eagerness on the white wolf's face. She moved to the ladder and quickly climbed up and found herself once again in the Queen's chambers, and once again they were empty. Arya looking around them and wondering where the hell Cersei was and why she was not here. Moving to the door, she opened it just a crack and looked out into the hall. There were some guards, but not many, and she felt they could take them easily enough. Hurrying back to the hatch, she gave the signal to Gendry and the Hound and the Unsullied, Ariel laughing quietly as they somehow managed to get Ghost up the ladder. A combination of the Hound's brute strength and the White Wolf himself managing to force him through the hole he'd just gotten through when she heard the door open, and she moved to see who had entered the room. With needle in her hand, she was on the girl before she could speak, her hand over her mouth and needle at her throat. "Where's the Queen?" she asked softly. "The King's chambers," the girl said. "Alone?" "With the King," the girl said. "How many guards?" she asked. 4 and Sir Robert strong. "I'm going to tie you up and leave you at the bottom of the ladder. It's that or kill you." If you make a sound, you'll leave me with no choice, she said, looking to the girl's frightened eyes. I won't, please don't hurt me, the girl said, her voice pleading. And Arya found she had no desire to, no wish to, which surprised her somewhat. After tying her up and leaving her at the bottom of the ladder, the hound moved a large statue onto the hatch just in case, and they moved to the door. Taking another look out into the corridor, she saw there were only 3 guards in sight. Arya turned back to the others and held up her fingers to let them know what they faced. She waited until the guards had turned away, and then giving the nod to those with her, they moved from the room. The spears flew through the air, and Ghost moved quicker than even them. Arya looking on as 2 men fell to the ground and the third to the White Wolf. With all 3 dead, they moved quickly. Gendry and the Hound moving the bodies into an empty room, and Arya looking down the corridors while trying to figure out which way to go. The King's chambers? She asked, and the Hound shook his head before moving past her and walking off to the left. I guess it's this way then, Gendry said, and she smirked at him as they followed. King's Landing 305 AC. To John Connington. They moved through the darkness of the city, their golden uniforms covered in rags and tattered clothing. Bealoch, Lysanor, Franklin Flowers, Tristan Rivers, Duncan Strong, and Brendel Byrne. 7 men with one goal, one purpose, to see Harry Strickland, and those who had turned on them were made to pay. That no one paid them any attention only showed just how piss-poor a leader Strickland was. Outside the gates, an army that was 6 or even 7 times their size, along with 2 dragons, awaited, while inside they acted as if they had nothing to fear. Patrols were sparse, guards even sparser, and just looking around at the defenses that had been erected made Jon weep for the men who served this fool. Each member of the Golden Company had fought and bled and was as brave as any man should be, and yet, under Strickland, they were being led to their doom. He looked to Bealoch and Lysanor, and could see they were thinking as he was, the looks on their faces ones of disgust and dismay. There was a resolve there too, though, and so it was that he concentrated on Jon, allowing their resolve to fuel his own. And if the gods were truly on their side, then perhaps they could save these men here tonight. When they reached the Tyrell Manse, he was again taken aback by just how poorly defended it was. Was it Greyjoy's death? Their own disappearance? Or was it just that Strickland was as poor a commander as they all knew he was? Whatever the reason for it, Jon was not a man who refused a gift such as this, and so, after they had snuck over the walls and made their way to the entrance, he and the others quickly removed their tattered rags. What if it's a trap? He heard Tristan ask Brendel, the laugh he heard then bringing a smile to his face. Then we're fucked, Rivers, Brendel said to Chuckles. But homeless Harry isn't smart enough to lay traps, and before I meet my gods I intend to see that man is fucked but good. When the first of the guards looked their way, Jon saw him turn away. The gold they wore was enough to show them as friends. It was the second man who realized there was something wrong, and it was Balak who ended him. Jon looking on as the arrow caught the man flush in the chest, and hearing Duncan Strong say that was for old John Mudd. The first guard looked to the fallen man and then to them, moving at first to raise the alarm, and then he stopped and moved closer towards them. Griff, Lysanor? The man asked, and Jon looked on as Lysanor moved to him. Dare, is that you? Lysanor asked. We were told you were dead, that the dragons had sent blades in the night to end you. Dara asked. Blades were sent, but it was homeless Harry who wielded them. Lysanor said, and Dara looked to see Brendel and Duncan nod, that it was true. For fuck's sake, I take it you're here to gut the cunt. We are. What side are you on, boy? He asked with his hand on his sword. I stand with the men of the Golden Company, Griff, the true men. I'll not be alone in that. Let me lead. I'll point out who you can trust, Dara said, and Lysanor nodded to him, so Jon agreed. Moving through the manse with Dara in the lead, they found more than one man willing to join them, and by the time they reached the main hall, there were almost 20 of them. Dara told them that those closest to Strickland were given more freedom, allowed to drink more, and not take part in drills, and he spat on the ground as he heard it. Miles Toyne had been a good man and true. He'd have never allowed the company to fall to these depths, and though he had been called the Black Heart, it seemed to him that it was Strickland all the while who should have been named as such. How drunk will these men be? Duncan asked Dara, the man, smiling when he answered. Very. More than likely these are the fuckers who attacked us. I say we show them the same mercy they did our brothers, Brendel said. Them and then homeless Harry, he said, and saw the nods as Dara opened the door. They moved as one. Jon's sword cutting down 2 men before they rose, while Balak's arrows flew straight and true. While the men who joined them fought and killed any they faced, those who had been in that room that night didn't just bring death with them. This one, they brought fury, vengeance, and wrath. And Jon too played as keen a role as any did in the carnage. Any man unlucky enough to fall to their blades would welcome death when it came, and for some, it wouldn't come soon enough. "Strickland?" he asked the clearly disturbed Dara and was pointed in the direction of the bedchamber. He moved fast, a part of him worried that homeless Harry would have heard the fighting and ran like the coward he truly was. Opening the door, though, he should have expected what he saw. Harry lay in his bed with a young girl, both of them still asleep, while around them his men had been killed. Even in his death, it would seem that Strickland would prove himself to be a poor soldier and an even worse commander. Jon reached down to the bed and grabbed the man by the hair. The scream he made was one that he enjoyed hearing as he did the look of terror on his face. He saw Lysino throw the girl some coin and move her along as he then dragged a naked Harry Strickland from the room. Lysino picking up Blackfire as he followed after him. "Jon, please, it wasn't me," Strickland said, his voice grating on him as he begged, the rest of his words heard but not cared to be by him. "I swear it, Jon. I didn't know it was our men we were to attack. I tried to get out of the contract when we did. The company, Jon, I'll bring the company to your side, to your prince's side. He is my king, and you Strickland should really shut the fuck up. No one here cares what you have to say," he said as he kicked the man in the chest and knocked him to the ground, Harry falling in front of the other 6 men that he'd tried to have killed. "Ulak, please. Tristan, Duncan, you know me." Harry stayed crawling to each of the men. "More's the pity, for it's to my shame that I named you my commander," Duncan said. "You betrayed us all, Harry. Good men are dead because of you. Loyal men who served the company well and put coin in your pocket, and you saw them dead," Lysino said, his voice full of bitterness and regret. "It was the Queen, Jon. We could take her down, together. We could rule," Harry said, and Jon laughed. "There is an army outside our gates that will soon see the true king and queen rule. You stupid fuck. As for you, you'll not see the morrow." "Jon, please, gold, I can give you gold," Harry said pleadingly, and Jon looked to Lysino, who handed him Blackfire. He nodded to each of the men and watched as they took out their daggers. Jon smiling as he looked back to Strickland and saw the terrified look on his face. "Remember our words, Harry. Beneath the gold, the bitter steel," he said with a nod, as one by one the men moved toward the traitor in their midst. He looked on as Franklin took an ear and as Tristan took another, as Balak cut a finger and Lysino took something much larger and more precious. Duncan took an eye while Brendel just buried his dagger deep into Harry's stomach. Jon then moved forward, and as Lysino and Balak held his arms and pushed Strickland down, Jon readied Blackfire to take his head. "For all those who fell because of a worthless piece of shit like you," he said as he swung Blackfire and took the man's head. He watched the head roll and the blood pool from where the body fell. Jon then turning to look at the 6 men who each felt just as he did. Justice had been served this night, but the night was not over, and they had much work to do to make ready for the morrow. "Send for the other captains. Have them brought here," Jon said, looking to Dara and the men with him. "What are we going to do, Griff?" Dara asked. "We're going to take this city for our king and open the gates for our queen," he said with a smile as he looked down at Blackfire and pictured it on Aegon's hip. "King's Landing, 3015 AC. Aegon." The eyes of both the city and the woman he walked with were on him as he walked through King's Landing. Nerigan could hear the comments being made, and he wondered, was Cersei's hold on information so lax, or was something else at work? Chants of Dragon King, King in the North, and Regerson grew in volume the closer they got to the Red Keep. That those chants didn't seem to upset Cersei one bit, and if anything seemed to make her walk a little taller and grip his arm a little tighter, only served to prove true what both Kinvara and Melora had said. Though truth be told, even had there been no such chance, the truth of those words would have been made clear by just how Cersei had looked at him both during the parley and now as they walked through the city. It made him even more hopeful that this plan could work and they could take the city without either devastating it with their own attacks or, more worriedly, with Cersei's use of wildfire. Aegon, knowing that it was that and the thoughts of them losing so many people, including those they cared about, that had in the end made Dany agree to this plan. She had not wished to, and he himself had no desire to risk so much. But the thoughts of Rockale falling after what he'd gone through with Euron and of so many others losing their lives here today was just too much to bear. No matter that it would have been Cersei Lannister and not he or Dany who had used wildfire, it would still be their family that was in some way blamed for it. His grandfather's work somehow finished by both him and Dany, and he couldn't allow his love to live with such a shadow over her life. It had been hard enough to live with the shadow of her father for her in some respects, as it was, and Daenerys had never been able to bring the wildfire to bear. Truly, it was ironic when he thought of it. His grandfather, her father, was known as the Mad King, and his name was synonymous with the use of wildfire. Yet other than with his other grandfather, he'd used it sparingly. Meanwhile, it was the Lannisters who'd actually used it to kill large numbers of people, both in Blackwater Bay and in the Septas of Baelor. Yet to the realm it would always be House Targaryen and not House Lannister who'd be tarred with the stain of it forever. "You're most quiet, my king," Cersei said, and Aegon turned to smile at her, seeing her own smile soon appear. "I must confess to being intimidated slightly by you, your grace. Never before have I seen a true queen so in complete command of all around her, and it's both intimidating and, dare I say it, exciting," he said, and saw her nostrils flare just a little. "And I had thought you a savage at one point, your grace. I must beg forgiveness for it," she said, looking deep into his eyes. "At one point perhaps I was, but I now save my savagery for a more true setting. I find that at times it's good to let the beast out to play. Your grace," he said, and he swore, were they alone, then he'd perhaps have been attacked. Such was how she looked at him, Cersei breathing deeply and letting her tongue lick her lips before they began to walk again. It made him sick to his core to flirt with this monster of a woman, and yet he knew he had to play his part. He had to get her alone and vulnerable, and then hope that Arya and the others did what they needed to do. When she turned from him, Aegon closed his eyes and found himself back in his tent. His wife, their babe, and Luciarch soon on his mind, instead of the crazed lioness that held his arm so tightly. "You should not do this, my love," Dane said. "I must. We cannot allow her to use wildfire. She cannot be allowed to set the city ablaze," he said, brushing his fingers over her face. "You risk too much, Aegon. Once again, you risk far too much," she said, moving from him. Aegon looking at her as she sat up in the bed and almost seemed to wrap her arms around herself. "When I was brought back, I had no true idea what that was for," he began, Dane still not looking at him. But she was listening much to his relief. "I thought it was to prepare the realm for the Night King and the army of the dead, to warn people and to gather a force large enough to beat him." "You did beat him," Dane said, and he saw a small smile on her face. "We beat him. You and I together. I could not have done it alone, Dany. I was never meant to." She turned to look at him, and he could see the worry in her eyes as she did so, and it pained him deeply that he was the cause of that worry. It was something he had hoped he would never be, something that he wished he'd never see in her, and yet rather than be the one to take all her worries away, he was now the reason for most of them. "Yet you once again are doing something alone," she said, and though there was no accusation, the words still stung. "I must play my part, as must others. But I am not alone. I've not been alone since I met you. You, me, our babe, the dragons. We are a family, Dany, no matter if we're parted for a moment, an hour, or a day. We are a family, and we will both never be alone again," he said, reaching out and glad when she allowed him to take her in his arms. "Promise me you'll return to me," she said softly. "I told you that we will see our children born, Daton. See them grow. We will be there for them always, unlike our own family who weren't able to be there for us. I promise you that I will return, and the life we are to share together is only at its beginning. I swear it on the old gods and the new," he said. He opened his eyes to find he was now walking down a corridor, and the door he was being led to was a large one. When it was opened, he heard Cersei send for food and wine, and she bid him take a seat. Aegon doing as she asked and smiling at her as she did so. It was time to be a mummer once more, and he only hoped that he could play the role as long as it was needed. The gods had granted him favor by bringing him back. He prayed they had more plans for him, and that Melora and Kinvara were truly their servants. "Shall we, my king?" Cersei said as the meal was placed on the table. "We shall, my queen," he said, and saw her smile as broadly as she had since he'd agreed to the parley. They ate. Cersei drank the wine as if it was water, while he sipped his own and poured some of it out. When she wasn't looking at him, which was only very briefly, he found, whether she believed what she was doing was a seduction of some sort or not, He played along as best he could, finding it harder to do than he had at first imagined it, and noticing a change come over her face as she became displeased by his feigned interest in her. Knowing he had to change tack, he decided it was for the best if he spoke of things that she would enjoy, and he begged his father and mother's forgiveness for the lies he was about to speak. "When I found out the truth of myself, I was, as you can imagine, quite shocked," he said as he took a sip of the wine and looked over the glass at her. "As was I, though the more I look at you, the more I must admit that it's clear you're his son," Cersei said, and he could see this change in conversation was what she wished for. "My father left me letters. Letters I expected would speak of my mother," he said, and saw her frown. "Yet they did not. They spoke of his regrets instead," he said immediately, perking her interest. "Regrets?" she asked curiously. "Of a life not lived and a match not made. One which I was unaware was a possibility, but one that it seemed my father very much wished for," he said, and he could see her breathing faster as she moved in her chair. "A match to whom?" she asked almost pleadingly. "To the woman he loved truest of all." "To you, my queen," he said, and he swore she almost fainted in her glee. Aegon looked at her as she closed her eyes and almost collapsed back into the chair, feeling his stomach turn as he realized she was in a state of almost euphoric bliss. When she opened her eyes and looked at him, he knew he had to continue. The distraction had to hold, and this, it seemed, was the way to achieve that. "It was why I was so eager for this meeting, Your Grace. So I could see what it was about you that my father was so very keen on," he said, and he saw her narrow her eyes as she looked at him, a smirk on her face, while she waited for him to elaborate. Aegon not doing so for a moment, and so she asked him impatiently. Such was her need to know that he'd found it. "And have you found what you were looking for, my king?" she asked eagerly. "Your beauty was well known to me, of course, even from when I was a boy who thought himself a bastard. Even at Winterfell, I had heard tales of the beauty of Cersei Lannister," he said, and saw her almost swell up pridefully. "Then I had the great fortune of seeing that beauty for myself. May I be candid, Your Grace?" he asked. He was surprised that she couldn't answer. Her nod, one that was vigorous, and her eagerness for him to speak more was clear. "The first night that I saw you, I pleasured myself with thoughts of you. I was but a young boy laying in a bed in Winterfell while you shone like the very sun itself in its great hall." "You did," she said, smiling fully as she licked her lips. "I did as I nearly did again that night after the parley in the dragon pit," he said, and she looked at him curiously. "Why not that time?" she asked curiously. "I was no longer a boy, Your Grace, and so my hand wouldn't have been nearly enough," he said, and he heard the little gasp she took. "When I saw you today, those feelings rose up once more, but there was something else that struck me too." "What?" she asked, almost demandingly. "That I could see it. Why my father had thought you to be the perfect woman to be his queen. Why he had wished to name you as such, and why he had those regrets." "And what would you do were you your father?" she asked, staring at him, her eyes almost devouring him as she spoke. "I'm not my father, Your Grace, but I would seek to do what he could not. I would seek an alliance with a queen that the realm could unite behind. But that's only what the king in me would do. I find that as much as I wish the king in me to be who guides my actions now that we're alone, it is the beast in me who does." He heard a scuffling outside, and he rose to his feet. As did Cersei. Aegon, though, stared at her, and she at him almost challengingly. "What does the beast want?" she asked, her breathing shallow, her hands barely able to hold onto the table. "To take you," he said, moving towards her. He saw her swoon, and then he was behind her, as the door opened, the guards bursting in, and Cersei torn between looking to them or to him. The master that wore the pin of the hand looked at him, the queen, and then the guards, while Aegon moved quickly. Cersei almost collapsed into his arms as he stood behind her, the knife in his hand, now on her throat, and as she rubbed against him and waited for him to do likewise, it was the maester who spoke. "The city has fallen, Your Grace. This is a mummery," the maester said, though she barely heard him, so keen was she to be with him, and him alone. Out. All of you, leave me with my king," Cersei said, and as she moved the knife nicked her and she moaned loudly, thinking it to be some game he was playing. "I will gut her here in front of you, so if you don't wish her dead, you should throw down your arms." As years in finally, Cersei seemed to understand the position she was in. The fall of King's Landing, 305 AC. Dany. The longer it went without a signal, the more she worried, not even Sartor Davos's return making her feel any better about things. Drogon was doing his best to calm Rhaegal down. The Green Dragon was worried about Aegon just as much as Dany was. Around the walls of King's Landing, the army stood ready to attack on her orders. Dornishmen, Reachmen, Stormlanders, Westerlands men, Unsullied, her Daughtry, and the dragons, all just waiting for her to order them forward. Yet, Dany waited and hoped the signal would come and that the plans that Aegon had risked himself for would be proved to be true. When it did, she almost couldn't believe it. The men on the walls that manned the scorpions falling to the ground or being taken prisoner by the Golden Company and the gates opening and men quickly riding out and heading their way. Seeing that it was some of the men that Jon Connington had brought with him the night before who were now riding towards her, she knew the first part of the plan had been completed. Dany waiting until Lysano and Franklin reached her before then giving the order to march into the city. We have the walls, the gates, and are moving to the Red Keep, Your Grace. Lysano said, Lord Jon, she asked, has taken men to go to the king. Then we march, she said to a nod from the man, as she turned around to give the order. Accept any surrender and know that the Golden Company are our allies. Once more, they are not to be attacked, she shouted, seeing Lysano's relieved look. She moved to the dragons, as did Serra Jorah, Serra Brienne, and Serra Jaime, all of them climbing up onto Drogon's back, though it was Rhaegal who flew first. By the time they were in the air, her army was marching forward, Grey Worm and Cano leading her men, while Lord Leyden, Serra Daemon Sand, Serra Daemon, and Lord Edric led their own. Rhaegal reached the gates before her, and as she flew over them herself, she could see the soldiers below her had already surrendered to the Golden Company. Dany followed after Rosio, and saw the Red Keep in the distance, her thoughts now on the Green Dragon and on her husband, who was somewhere inside. She hoped that when she reached it, it would be to see Axelon standing victorious and to find the war to be over. The fear she felt that it would be to something much worse was something that she fought down and convinced herself was not to be. Together we will be together, she said softly, as Drogon flew. The Hound. 6 men had fallen, and he'd not even wet his sword. The Unsullied and the White Wolf acting like greedy fuckers and moving far more quickly than he, the Bastard Smith, and the Wolf Girl. Sandor could see the nervousness on the Wolf Girl's face as she worried about her brother. His own bore a completely different expression as he thought about his brother and the vengeance that was to be his. He was excited, and it was a feeling he'd not known for many a year, one that he'd almost believed he'd never feel again. Their fight had been coming ever since Gregor had caught him with that toy, and by day's end, either he or his brother would be gone from this world and into another. He heard the Wolf Girl ask the Bastard Smith to hurry, her worry for her brother threatening to rob her of her senses. Sandor couldn't allow that to happen, and while he was sure there was no one in this world he truly loved anymore, she was perhaps as close to that for him as he would ever find. Your brother will be well, Wolf Girl. I told you he's a mad fucker who runs into danger. But he always returns, Sandor said. He has no sword, no weapons, she said back to him. He is a fucking weapon, he said with a chuckle that she didn't much appreciate. Heads up. There are more of them here, Gendry said, stopping the conversation, and as they turned the corner, it was to meet a large group of men, Sandor enjoying the thought of finally facing some action, and so the smile he wore was a true one. As he moved forward, it was not to be much of a fight. The White Wolf was like 10 men. Sandor admired its lethality as it dispatched one man and moved on to the next in the blink of an eye. The Unsullied moved as one, their spears and training both too much for the men they faced. Even the Bastard Smith seemed much more accomplished in killing than he'd expected, Gendry wielding his warhammer like he'd been born to do so. As for the Wolf Girl, she was perhaps the only one of them who could keep up with the White Wolf's movements. Sandor looking on as she danced her way past one man whose throat she slit before moving to the next one. He used his great sword as he always did, power, strength, and ferocity, his biggest attributes, and these men in red were no match for any one of them. 3 men he killed by the time it was over, 1 less than the Wolf Girl, and 4 less than the greedy fucking wolf. We're almost there, he said as they moved on. The king's chambers now in view, and there were few guards between them and it. Fewer by the time he reached the door, as the White Wolf and the Unsullied once again took all the fun out of his day. Though when they did make it through the door itself, he felt his fun was just about to begin. He saw the king holding a knife to the lion bitch's throat, and the guards were now torn between moving to her or to them. Then he saw the man he came for, and after that, he could see nothing else in the room. Brother, he shouted as Gregor drew his sword, and then there was chaos. He saw a brief flash of golden hair running from the room, the dark hair of the king or who he thought was the king moving after it. The guards who had been still were now fighting the Unsullied and the Wolf Girl and Bastard Smith, and he and Gregor were crossing blades, finally, watching his great sword glance off the armor. He felt his anger grow. Without it, his brother was nothing, slower than he, less skilled than he. True, he had him beat, on strength, but it was the heavy plate that truly saved Gregor more than anything. Using his sword almost more as a bludgeon than a sword, he began to crash it down hard on the armor, and seeing his brother stumble as he tried to block the blows, gave him hope that he would find a way past the heavy plate. When he was hit by Gregor's head and felt the bone in his nose break, he stumbled backward and barely managed to get out of the way when his brother's great sword swung his way. He moved from the room to recover, and Gregor followed. The two of them almost unable to use their swords in the hall, and soon enough he found himself in a large and open space. The map of the realm under his feet, and the sky over his head, making him smile. "It seems the gods want to see your death, brother. I'll see they're not disappointed," he shouted to an even louder roar from Gregor. His brother's next sound was unintelligible and more a grunt than words, and it was soon lost in the noise as their great swords met once more. Again he cursed the armor as his own began to crack and break, while his brother's held firm, despite how heavy the blows he caught it with. When he felt the blood at his side, he knew that Gregor had pierced his armor, and it angered him greatly. Sandor slamming his greatsword down hard against his brother's helm, and seeing him stumble, he moved towards him, and brought the sword down even harder onto his brother's arm. Almost smiling when Gregor's sword fell to the ground, only to feel his own arm break, and his sword fall when his brother clubbed him a heavy blow, and caught him square on the bone. "Why won't you just fucking die?" he shouted as Gregor grabbed him, his hands gripping Sandor's throat and soon taking the air from him, and he felt himself slipping away. He saw the wolf girl move toward his brother, and he shook his head. He was his, and even should Gregor win, he'd not accept another taking him from this world while he still lived. "Sandor," she shouted, and he saw her hold the Valyrian steel dagger in her hand. He nodded, and she threw it his way. How he caught it, he couldn't tell, as he was beginning to see only darkness, but he did, and with everything he had, he slammed it into Gregor's neck. He felt his brother's hands drop from his neck, and he breathed in as deeply as he could. Gregor falling to his knees, but still alive as Sandor ripped the dagger from his neck and then pulled off the helm. This thing in front of him had been his brother once. Now he was something much different, ugly, misshapen, and Sandor felt that he now looked just as corrupted on the outside as he always had on the inside. "Die, you fuck," he said, as he slammed the dagger down on Gregor's head. He fell to the ground, tired and bleeding, but he would live. The wolf girl coming to him and making sure he would make it before she took the knife from Gregor's head. "The Golden Company men are here. They'll keep you safe." "I have to find Jon," the wolf girl said, and he nodded. "I'll be all right. Go find your brother," he said, and she nodded before moving away. "Jordir," he called out, and she stopped to look back at him. "Thank you," he said, and as she moved away, he felt a peace that he'd never known before. Jon Connington. After gathering all the captains, and with both Strickland dead and him now in possession of Blackfire, not to mention the fact that there was a rather large army outside the gates, as well as 2 very large dragons, Jon found that taking command of the Golden Company had not been hard. Once he'd done so, he'd sent Balak and the others to take the city, deal with the Scorpions, and open the gates while he and a large contingent had moved on to the Red Keep. Each moment he went without actually seeing that his king was safe and unharmed was absolute torture for him. Jon, though proud that the king was taking part in things himself, was more than worried that he'd risked himself so. Only the thoughts of wildfire and what that would do to the city and to his men had been enough for him to not raise an even larger objection. That and the fact that he wasn't yet in a position of trust enough to do so. He knew the Queen and the Hand had raised their own objections, and if they couldn't convince Aegon to allow someone else to do what he was doing, then Jon would only have wasted his time. Moving through the city was easy enough. The Golden Company easily dwarfed the Gold Cloaks, and the few Lannister men that the Queen had under her command and the Ironborn were no more. So it wasn't until they reached the Red Keep itself that they were even questioned, and when the men tried to stop them, it was there that the fighting began. Despite having black fire, it was his own sword he wielded, Jon cutting down men as he fought his way inside, while all around him the Golden Company men easily dealt with any and all who tried to stop them. They fought through the corridors, and other than some men with crossbows who managed to kill one or two of the men with him, they made good time, but they were yet to find any sight of the king. "Aegon, where is he?" he asked some soldiers who they had surrounded. "Who?" "Aegon Targaryen, the king. Where is he?" he shouted to confused. "Looks Jon Snow," he said angrily. He ran towards the courtyard. "That way," one of the men said, and Jon was moving yet again. When they reached him, Jon found himself almost panicking. There were guards between him and the king, and the knife he held in his hand would do Aegon no good against the men that moved towards him. Many years earlier, Jon had been forced to run for his life, as that day at the Stony Sept had come so very close to costing him more than his reputation. When all was lost and they had needed to retreat, and he had run faster than he had thought possible, today he ran faster still. The men behind him moved just as quickly, and as he got close enough, he pulled out Blackfire and shouted, "My king," he said as he threw it in the air, the sword seeming to spin as it flew over the heads of the men between Aegon and him. Jon looked on, in relief as it landed close to the king. Jon picking up the sword, and some of the men who had been facing him now faced Jon and his own men. Even as he fought his way through them to get to Jon's side, Jon found himself looking on as his king wielded Blackfire as if he was born to do so. The Sword of Kings was back in Targaryen hands for the first time in almost 100 years, and it was in the hands of a Targaryen who was skilled enough to wield it. He killed 2 men in the same time that the king killed 5. Jon relieved when finally the men who hadn't fallen to their swords then knelt and surrendered. His time to enjoy it, though, was brief as the king looked around frantically. "Cersei, I have to stop her. She means to see the city burn." Aegon said, and before Jon could say anything to him, he was racing off with Jon and some of his men following behind as quickly as they could. Cersei. He had lied to her, played her false with tales of his father, and as she ran, she was certain now that he was not truly Rhaegar's son. Jon Snow was just as she had always thought he was, a bastard wolf who now dared to play a dragon and who had tried to fool a lioness. She would not have it, though, and she'd see him, his dragon whore, and the entire city burn. Cersei had broken free during the confusion when the Hound had gone for his brother, and while a part of her had wished to stay and watch Cersei Robert kill them all, her mind had screamed at her to run and see them burn, and so run she had. The cut on her neck from the knife the bastard had held to it was a shallow one, more an annoyance than any true injury, and yet it hurt her all the same. How had she been so foolish? How had she allowed him that close? Was it grief? It must have been the grief she felt for her love. That could be the only reason, couldn't it? Even running for her life, her mind was more troubled about what had happened in that room than what was to happen now. Cersei was more upset that he'd proved to be false than she was concerned that she may die here today. That she knew that before she fell, she'd see them all fall first, was the only other clear thought she had. That and she needed to find her men. She had to find the right men to see her plans accomplished. Qyburn? Where was he? Was he dead? Does the bastard have him? She couldn't be certain, and as she finally made it out of the Red Keep and into the courtyard, she found that it didn't matter. Burn them all," she shouted as she saw some of her guards in front of her. The men looking at her in confusion, and then Cersei looking on in horror as men in gold attacked them. She looked around frantically, both for an escape and for men to carry out her orders, finding no sight of the former, but there were more of the latter somewhere. She knew there were, running once more. Cersei looked over her shoulder. The bastard had been chasing after her, but she'd lost him, and she found herself laughing giddily at that. A dragon would have caught her, but not a bastard wolf. No wolf could outrun a lioness. How long she ran for, she didn't know. Only she was out of breath, and there were few of her men and more of the ones in gold around her. She stopped to gather her thoughts and her breath, and once she had, she knew what she needed to do. Running once more, she saw him over her shoulder. His black hair and deep purple eyes almost clear to her, even though he was some distance behind. In front of her, she saw them and smiled. These men would see her right. They would help her see the city burn, she thought as she raced towards them. Burn them all," she shouted. And then she found herself stopping. The men were in flames, and the black dragon was moving her way. Cersei saw the silver hair of the dragon whore, the white cloaks of men behind her, and for a brief moment she swore she saw Jaime on the dragon's back. She knew, though it was not him, he would never betray her. He was her other half. They belonged together. Turning back, she saw the dark hair of the bastard wolf getting closer. Her eyes were torn between him and the black dragon in front of her, and Cersei, for the briefest moment, panicked as she began to shout out the words, "Burn them all! Burn them all! Burn them all!" Then, all of a sudden, she felt the strangest sensation. One moment she was on the ground, calling for a city to be burned, and then she was in the air. The city was soon below her, and the sky above seemed larger than it had ever been. Her eyes tried to focus, and she saw him then. His silver hair, his indigo eyes, his black armor covered in rubies. He had come for her. When she had needed someone the most, he had come for her, and as she looked to him, she smiled. Only to then watch him fade from her view and to see the true horror of the situation she was now in. The green dragon was smaller than his larger black brother, yet he was just as large compared to her. She was gripped tightly in his claws, and they were beginning to squeeze ever tighter. Below her, the city that should have been hers now belonged to another, and there was no one to come to her aid. No one to rescue her, or even to hold her hand as the darkness began to close in. She felt the claws squeeze ever tighter, her breaths grow ever shorter. And as she realized that she was about to die, she had only one thought, and it was to be the last words she ever spoke. "Valakar," she said, as Rukal squeezed the life from her.